You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
There she was, tucked away in plain sight, not in Israel or in Paris, but in New Hampshire. Ghislaine Maxwell is finally under lock and key. Makes you wonder how the FBI took so long to locate her when her society friends in Britain appear to have been in regular touch with her, mainly to assure themselves that she wasn't going to put Prince Andrew in deep doo-doo. And speaking of deep doo-doo, Donald Trump's poll ratings are melting faster than his makeup. There's even quite a book now being opened on whether or not he'll even run in November. Meanwhile, Biden's still hiding. The basement tapes still keep coming out, but no rave reviews. And here in Britain, the Scottish nationalist vigilantes are lining up across the border, telling English travellers by car to get the F out of Scotland. Believe it or not, they were done up in white suits with hoods. Yes, that's right. Scotland's KKK were telling the English to get lost, even though the furlough is mainly being paid for by the taxpayers in England. And even more pertinently, aeroplanes are landing in Edinburgh and Glasgow every 60 minutes from abroad, and not so much as a temperature taken, never mind being turned away at the air frontier. We'll be talking, of course, about the coronavirus and much, much else. This is a radio show with pictures, so fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be an unusually bumpy ride.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
This is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. We're on FM in crystal clarity in the Washington, D.C. area. 105.5 are the magic numbers there. Big audience, by the way, in Washington, D.C., including several members of Congress. Imagine that! They're supposed to be boycotting RT, but they're watching the mother of all talk shows. We're on AM in the United States from Burning City to Burning City, and we'll be talking to Robbie Martin first up about what's happening down on the street in the United States of America. Where's Biden hiding, and why are his basement tapes so absolutely execrable? And what's happening to Donald Trump? His poll ratings are now so dire that there's a book being opened, and quite short odds, remarkably, that he won't even run in November. Personally, I doubt that myself. But we'll be talking up first, here in my monologue, the seizure of Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of the late thief robber baron Robert Maxwell. And seldom has an apple fallen closer to the tree than Ghislaine Maxwell. She was the old thief, the old scoundrel's favourite child. So much so that he named his yacht, off the back of which he fell or was pushed, the Lady Ghislaine. Well, Lady Ghislaine is currently behind bars, tasting porridge for the first time. Or is she? Has a deal been done with the FBI? Is it remotely plausible that they did not know that she was hiding out in New Hampshire when they were supposedly scouring the world to interview her as a suspect, having been named by literally dozens of young girls, some of them small children, who claim that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein sexually abused them, attacked them, raped them. That's right, capital R, rape. There ain't no consent with a 14-year-old girl, Ghislaine. And of course, Prince Andrew, who famously cannot sweat, was last seen sweating because, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell was the air bridge between the Jeffrey Epstein operation and the British royal family. Epstein regarded Prince Andrew and described him to witnesses as his Super Bowl icon. He was the jewel, imagine, what a tawdry crown that must have been. The jewel in Epstein's crown, but there were many other crusties in that crown. The former president of the United States, Bill Clinton, for one. The would-be president of the United States, Hillary Clinton, for another. The former prime minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, and many, many other people are in this grisly tale of the Epstein operation. Now, I watched, as I told you, the Netflix series on Epstein, and it was very well done, and it demonstrated beyond any contradiction the loathsome immorality of the Epstein circle and the black book in which many big names are written have got something to answer for. I'm not saying that the likes of Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson were ever up to no good with young girls on Pedophile Island or in the gigantic townhouse in Manhattan, which Epstein miraculously purchased for $1 off the owner of Victoria's Secrets. Quite a secret, that one, how that $1 purchase came about. I'm not saying that those who are in the black book are necessarily suspect of high crimes, grave felons, but they do have to explain what first attracted them to the billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. They do have to explain why they were so friendly with Epstein, and especially after he had already been convicted of sex offences against young girls. And preeminent amongst those is, of course, the Queen's son, Prince Andrew. Now, we have a remarkable standoff here. Prince Andrew claims that he's more than happy to cooperate with the FBI. The FBI keep demanding that Prince Andrew cooperates with them. So I'm offering myself this evening to bring the two parties together. I'm more than happy to broker a series of interviews between the FBI and His Royal Highness or His Royal Lowness, depending on how the interviews go. But somebody somewhere must be able to bring these two parties who say they're desperately keen to meet and talk and answer questions, must be able to bring them together. So much for the sex. It's always interesting, and in this case, it is utterly revolting, repulsive, disgusting, as low as it gets. But I also want to follow the money. I want to know where Epstein got all that money, because there is no discernible trace of how he earned billions of dollars, much of which he left, but most of which he spent on a lifestyle that can only be described as plutocratic. He was living as if he was one of the richest men on the earth, in which case, where did he get that money? Whose money was it? Ghislaine Maxwell, it's said, was given a $4 million helicopter as a present from Jeffrey Epstein. Where did that money come from? Where did the money come from for this series of luxurious properties all over the United States, all over Europe, and of course, infamously, in the Caribbean? where that island will come to be the focus of much attention when Ghislaine Maxwell goes on trial. Now, I'd be very surprised if Ghislaine Maxwell were to commit suicide in her cell. Probably not quite as surprised as she would be, but it's very, very important that the United States authorities keep this woman alive, because she must see the inside of a courtroom. She must be made to answer the allegations that still stand against her and her late benefactor. It is remarkable because I have, since the early 1980s, been at war with the Maxwell family, since the day, probably before it, that her father, Robert Maxwell, punched me full in the solar plexus in a BBC green room just before going on television for a live question time broadcast in full view of Sir Robin Day and the other panelists on the show that night. "Ah, Mr. Galloway, the PLO man," he said, prior to thumping me in the stomach so hard that I bent double and stood up straight with tears running down my face. I tabled motions in the House of Commons, asked questions in the House of Commons, covered, of course, by parliamentary privilege, which was the only way that the truth about Robert Maxwell could be uttered in this country without being crushed in a legal action, in a legal system that Maxwell manipulated to the ultimate degree. In the end, Mr. Maxwell, admittedly posthumously, had to buy me a car and a wing on my house, had to pay me a very substantial sum in damages, having defamed me in retaliation for my naming him in Parliament for multiple criminal activities. But more of that, I'm sure, later. Donald Trump was a pal of Jeffrey Epstein too, just not as big a pal as Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton appear to have been, or Peter Mandelson, for that matter. So the Epstein affair is perhaps not an existential danger to Donald Trump's presidency, but there are other existential dangers. As I said earlier in my introduction, the bookies are taking bets now and offering short odds on Trump being forced out of the race by plummeting poll numbers. The basement tapes, pitiful though they are, for hiding Biden are still coming out, and Biden's opinion poll rating is currently 50% to Donald Trump's 36%. Even in Ohio, Biden is substantially ahead of Trump, which would mean an electoral college landslide. Now you may say, why? Why would Trump bow out? There appears still to be life in him, just not life as we know it. Well, here's the reason. Donald Trump's going to badly need a pardon, and he can't pardon himself. If he is not to spend the rest of his life behind bars or in courts trying to stay out of prison, he's going to need a president in place that can pardon him for any crime or misdemeanor that he may have committed. That would argue in favor of him making way before November for Vice President Pence, who would then pardon President Trump, who could then go off to golf till his heart's content and as long as his bone spurs sustained him on the 18-hole walk around the course. It's a long shot for me. I don't myself see it, but it's short odds now at the bookmakers in the United States of America. We'll be discussing it with Robbie Martin and Anya Parampil in the show today. We'll be talking, of course, about Venezuela, where, as I think predicted last week in the short which we showed you from RT, that the High Court in London would legalise theft without even wearing a mask. They legalised the theft of $1 billion worth of Venezuelan gold bullion, handing it to a man in the street on the flimsiest of grounds that that man had declared himself to be the president of Venezuela. It has not just been a theft, it's been a murder. It has murdered London's reputation as a financial centre. And I have no hesitation in saying to anyone who will listen, don't keep your money in London. If I were to win the national lottery, the last place in the world I'd keep the money is London, because London's banks are run by thieves. 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 That's what you've done, High Court, justices. That's what you've done, Her Majesty's government. You've destroyed one of the few assets that this country any longer possesses, that of being a safe haven for people's money. As safe as the Bank of England used to be a thing when I was young. Turns out the Bank of England ain't safe at all. And we'll be talking, of course, about the Scottish nationalist cagoules at the border with their suits. I don't know what you call them, nuclear, biological, chemical suits, and hoods, and gloves, and rubber over their shoes, who were arranged over the border between Scotland and England, telling English travellers entering Scotland, how they knew they were English travellers, of course, is a moot point, because I was one of them, perfectly legally, going from one part of my country to another part of my country, telling them to get the F out of Scotland, but to leave their money before they turned back. Because, of course, the Scottish economy, like the English and Welsh economies, would literally now have collapsed if it were not for the expenditure of the monies from the Treasury in London, from the taxpayer of the entire UK, which has, through the furlough scheme, saved the jobs of many hundreds of thousands of people in Scotland and many tens of thousands of businesses. So tourists from England, not wanted on voyage. Furlough, taxpayers' money, leave it, please, at the border, and we'll pick it up. This on the day that the independence side of the great debate in Scotland finally tipped in favour of the Scottish nationalists. 54% say in a poll of 1,124 people, admittedly, that they will be voting for independence if another referendum comes along. And only, therefore, that's more or less a reversal of the figure that was achieved in 2014, the first time this matter was considered in a referendum which we were told was a once-in-a-lifetime affair, once-in-a-generation affair at least, but which turned out to not be accepted by those who lost it, who've been agitating for another go in the morning ever since. My position is clear. I think the breaking up of a small island of English-speaking people would be a very bad idea, and it would be particularly bad for the Scottish working class, which is the class about which I care the most. So we'll be talking about all of these things and the 72nd birthday of the National Health Service. And we've got a poll running. What birthday present should the NHS receive? A PFI write-off, that's the private finance initiative, which has turned into a giant albatross around the neck of the National Health Service, introduced first by the Conservatives, but multiplied many times over by that most Scottish of all governments, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Robin Cook, Donald Dewar, Alistair Darling, and so on. There were more Scots in that government that landed the NHS with this huge yoke around its neck than any government in all history. So if being governed by Scots is thought to be the be-all and end-all, the Blair-Brown years would seem to suggest that that ain't necessarily all that matters. So A, a PFI write-off, B, big pay rises for the NHS staff, or C, free tuition fees for nurses. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. There's more, much more of this. Stay tuned.
Radio Sputnik.
Hello, Pizza Express Woking. What is it you want? Oh, you want an ill-advised interview on the BBC? A cheese pizza, extra immature, and a raw bailout. No, we don't take taxpayers' money. Yeah, but we do take contactless. Would you like a receipt for that, Mr. Prince?
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
So first to the United States, Robbie Martin, filmmaker extraordinaire and, of course, co-host of Media Roots Radio, joins us now, I hope, from the United States. Robbie, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Let's start, if we may, with this idea that has begun to circulate quite powerfully in the United States, that Donald Trump won't even turn up in November, that he'll chuck it beforehand in order to get a pardon for anything he's done wrong from Vice President Pence, who would then become the Republican nominee. Where do you stand on that?
Well, thanks for having me back, George. It's interesting you asked that, because I think what I've been seeing, and I think that's what's kind of going under the radar, is that it's not just Biden who appears to have some form of serious cognitive decline. I would say, based on that last Mount Rushmore speech with Trump, my main takeaway from it, other than him being really desperate in his rhetoric, is that he appears to be suffering from some kind of physical brain ailment or cognitive decline that, I mean, if I was his age, I would think about just throwing in the towel, just in terms of, the stress of the job, and whatever effect it might be having on this potential physical condition he's suffering from. I wasn't even personally factoring in the idea that he would want a pardon, but that's definitely an interesting component that, I mean, could be very real. Who knows what will continue to come out? Michael Cohen, I mean, what's even his deal? Like, what does he have to say still? I mean, I don't trust the guy, but there's still a lot of loose ends in terms of people that can, pull the rug out from under him in terms of his criminal activity. So I definitely think that's possible.
Well, it just seems to me that the Democrats will be so vengeful towards Donald Trump, and with the support of course, the fake news media that Trump has been lambasting in virulent terms for 4 years, that the chances of Donald Trump leaving office peacefully and then spending the next few years in courts, if not in jail, that would be a powerful incentive, I think, to Donald Trump to bail out early. Pence becomes the stand-in president and pardons Trump for any and all allegations of criminal behavior. I would have thought that was quite an interesting offer for President Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it could be potentially, depending on what, I mean, it would be interesting to know what things Trump may believe are looming over him criminally. That's something I haven't really considered. But now that you're mentioning it, I mean, there's got to be stuff out there. I mean, let's even just talk about what you were bringing up earlier, the Epstein stuff. I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell, what's going to come out from her trial? What's going to come out from Alan Dershowitz? He just tweeted a few hours ago that he hopes there's videotapes that Epstein made because he believes he'll be exonerated if they are. So that could be...
That probably means there aren't, Robbie.
Yeah, probably.
Or that they're in a safe place.
Yeah. Or he has some kind of really crazy fetish that he wants those videos to come public. I have no idea, but I think that could be potentially be very bad for Trump if that comes out, because I think based on his behavior last time when Epstein was actually put in jail before he committed suicide, Trump was awfully mum about that. And you would think for someone who was that reviled, Trump would have a lot of horrible things to say about them, but he was awfully quiet. So I think that signals that there is something in the Ghislaine Maxwell arrest that will come back to haunt him for sure. So it could even just be something like that, potentially.
Were you shocked by Ghislaine Maxwell's suicide next week?
Yeah. Yes, I was, George. I was very shocked.
Do you think she'll end up on trial, or she cut a deal with the feds?
I believe that she will cut some kind of deal. I believe that she will. And I don't know what kind of deal that will be, but if she spills all the dirt, it'll unravel this 4-decade long, family lineage of deep state and conspiracies that will blow everybody's mind. I mean, just her father and her sisters that Whitney Webb has been recently talking about is pretty revealing. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing whatever will come out. But I do, unfortunately, George, I do think she will cut some kind of plea deal. Her charges are actually not even for underage child sex. They're for something else. So that, to me, signals that this might not be as good or as, explosive as everybody's hoping it's going to be. But I'm still holding.
It may be that they've spent the last year or more, when they were supposedly looking for Ghislaine Maxwell, actually negotiating with Ghislaine Maxwell on what she might plead to.
Absolutely, yeah. And what was this strange situation where she was staying with some corporate CEO in some rural mansion somewhere? Who's that guy? It's just strange how many connections she seems to have to different oligarchs and people who are like billionaires and multimillionaires. But yeah, I think it's very, very likely she already cut some kind of plea deal. This will unravel the lives and the reputations of so many elites that it'll be prevented in some form. Whether that means that...
What's happening down on the street, Robbie? There's virtually no coverage now of these demonstrations and attacks on statues and so on. But as I understand, they're all still going on and in significant numbers.
That's absolutely right, George. I think what happened was the media was really covering them initially because of all the rioting and the property destruction. And they kind of created this narrative where it was like, we will sort of back this, ideologically, if the protests are very, very safe and peaceful. And I think after that, oddly, they completely stopped covering it for the most part. I think it's just, it drove ratings to, cover things that looked bad, scary, things on fire. And now that it's just all peaceful protests, it's not really a ratings driver. It's not really, going to generate them advertising revenue. So I think from that perspective, that's probably why they aren't covering it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. They're still going on. There was just a Christopher Columbus statue knocked down in Baltimore, barely got any coverage. So that is definitely true. I mean, it seems like the right media are the ones mostly covering it now because they want to, drum up hysteria against the left. So the corporate media has kind of dropped that subject for the time being.
There's never been a 4th of July like this one, has there? Well over 100,000 people dead, almost 30% unemployment, not safe to go out, two imbecilic candidates fighting each other for president, and Kanye West and Kim Kardashian enter the scene. Is this serious? Are they actually going to run for president?
I mean, I can't say, but I can say that if Kanye actually does run, he will be able to move the needle and capture a lot of votes. So if he's serious, and if he somehow gets actually on the ballot, it's definitely going to have a real impact on the election, and there's no denying that. I mean, so I don't know if any other celebrities roll into the race, but it's pretty wild, and I don't know. A lot of people are sort of conspiracizing now that he's doing it because he's trying to split the vote and give votes to Trump. I don't know if I believe that. His relationship with Trump seems to be strategic. There are people who have sort of unpacked that whole thing and made it appear that Kanye is actually a huge supporter of Black Lives Matter, and that he's merely, trying to get some kind of criminal justice reform out of his relationship with Trump. I don't know if I fully believe that, but that's what some people are saying right now. So, there's different conspiracies about it, but in general, I mean, I think he's going to have a huge impact on the election, and it'll be weird because Kanye, was talking about things that were like Pizzagate and things like years ago. So who knows what his actual campaign platform is going to be, but I'm looking forward just to see how weird it will be.
Yeah, he better watch how he goes also, because a lot of the things he's been talking about are about the very same people we were discussing around the Epstein affair.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, Kanye is deep in Hollywood, so it'd be very interesting to see how that all plays out. But I kind of have a feeling, and I heard comedian Tim Dillon say this, and I think there's some truth to this, that I think Trump maybe even will want to step down from the presidency because he misses Hollywood. Even though all of Hollywood hates him, I feel that Trump might want to somehow win those people back over again and want to return there because so many people hate him right now. I can't imagine that he enjoys that just based on his personality. So I don't know. That's just a thought I keep having. So maybe it's kind of appropriate if Trump returns to Hollywood and then Kanye becomes president of the United States.
With Kim Kardashian as the first lady. Remarkable thought. Now, finally, Robbie, and I'm grateful for your time, the Biden, can he actually refuse to do any debates in the presidential election because it's working for him so far? He literally is producing basement tapes and he's at 50% in the polls.
I think that's a very good question, George, and I absolutely think that we will see in the coming months some kind of push by the DNC or Biden's campaign saying that we can't do a debate because of COVID and because of the lockdowns, or even potentially we can't allow people to vote in the general election. So that's skipping ahead. But I mean, if the COVID keeps spiking here in the United States, I think it's very, very likely we won't have any debates at all. And I can't even imagine Biden debating Trump. I mean, he would get absolutely trounced. There's just no chance that he would do well against Trump. So, yeah, I absolutely think that they'll try to figure out a reason to wiggle out of it. And we're going to probably see announcements or signaling towards that effect in the coming months.
Now, neither of them is going to end up on Mount Rushmore. But it was quite poignant, I thought, this weekend, not just the unhinged speech of President Trump, who appeared to say that Operation Desert Storm was a battle fought in the Vietnam War, which, of course, he dodged on account of his bone spurs, which miraculously cured themselves when he took up golf. But the people who own Mount Rushmore, who owned it, for whom it was sacred, and it was stolen from them when gold was discovered in them thar hills, they were there as kind of ghosts in the background, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, Mount Rushmore has a very odd and troubled history. I mean, I was just reading that, for a monument that appears to be in the tradition of sort of the grand Masonic, architecture in the United States tradition, a lot of these stonecutters who actually worked on Mount Rushmore died from lung illnesses. And that's not even mentioning the guy who made it was a Ku Klux Klan member. There's so many weird things about Mount Rushmore. The original design for it, too, was they were going to actually make a full body. You know, if it took that long to build it, almost 25 years, they were going to make a full body representation of all these presidents. And imagine how garish and horrific that would have looked carved into the side of a mountain. So I guess we're lucky that all we got was an unfinished, 4 presidents' busts on the side of a mountain. But yeah, it's really sad to think that was, a sacred Native American site. The whole mountainside of it looks gorgeous. I mean, the original, rock formations. So yeah, it is quite a tragedy. And I think that Trump is almost kind of doing a preemptive strike. And I think that what his speech really illustrated for me is that this campaign has become desperate. If he's essentially waging war against the left, social justice warriors, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, communists, I mean, it just seems like a really desperate play going into the election. And I don't quite even know if, people in his team agree with that strategy. I would be surprised if they did. So I'm confused that he is appearing this desperate, and I don't know if it's actually going to work to his advantage. I mean, it will rile up his base, but that's not enough to necessarily really power him through the election. It's going to be Biden being so awful of a candidate that's basically going to be his ace in the hole, I think. So maybe he's just counting on that.
Robbie Martin, as always, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Much appreciated. Now, the poll's running. What birthday present should the National Health Service receive? A PFI write-off, 30%. B, big pay risers, 40%. C, free tuition fees for nurses, 30%. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Let's squeeze in a call. Khurshid in Leicester, under lockdown. Go ahead, Khurshid.
Hi, Mr. Galloway. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Nice to hear from you, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you a question. I was wondering, it's more like a hypothesis, but I was just wondering what you think about it. That is, I mean, we know from before that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, they were quite close to Donald Trump. They knew Donald Trump personally. And after Jeffrey Epstein's arrest and death in the prison last year, it is a bit odd to me that the FBI, because in the news today and last week I saw that FBI was saying they knew where Ghislaine Maxwell was hiding and they've decided to arrest her now. It seems a bit odd to me that the timing of her arrest, because we are seeing that the media, or most of the American media, I don't know about most of the American media, but a large chunk of American media, or the deep state, is plotting to get rid of Donald Trump.
Sure.
Is there a correlation between the Ghislaine Maxwell arrest and upcoming U.S. presidential election? Could there be a link there?
There could, of course, Khurshid, and Robbie was just alluding to the somewhat of a mystery of what happened to the relationship between Epstein and Trump. I mean, they were both in New York. They were both, quote unquote, pussy-grabbing, misogynistic, sexist, and alleged rapist in Donald Trump's case. They had exactly the same predatory attitudes towards women. We have the Lockergate scandal before Trump's election, which revealed how Trump viewed women, including married women, as mere fruits for him to pluck. And it seems odd that he wouldn't have been chummy with Jeffrey Epstein, who was involved in exactly the same kind of predatory games. On the other hand, Epstein's relations with the Democrats are undoubtedly deeper, and more people are involved. Epstein was not a conservative. He was a part of that New York Democratic milieu. There's no suggestion, I think, that Trump was on the on the aeroplane, that Trump was on the island. But Bill Clinton flew on the aeroplane many, many, many times and visited the island many, many, many times. And that included not just Bill Clinton, but Hillary Clinton also. So it seems to me that both parties are compromised by their relationship to Jeffrey Epstein. Khurshid, thanks for that first call. Now, every week I do a short for RT. It's only 4 minutes. Take a look. This one's on Afghanistan. In the whole history of fake news, there's never been a more fake piece of news than the New York Times story about the Russians paying the Taliban to kill American soldiers. For a start, the idea that the resistance to foreign occupation in Afghanistan needs paying, well, that's a bit out of date. The last people to pay for resistance in Afghanistan was not Russia, but the United States of America throughout the 1980s. Billions of dollars in money and materiel, weapons and propaganda support was poured in by the United States taxpayer into the fathers or older brothers of the Taliban. And the purpose was not to kill American soldiers, but to kill Russian soldiers, thousands of whom they did kill. You might call it a bounty, a dollar bounty for every Russian head brought in. But the Afghans have been resisting foreign occupation for centuries, if not millennia, from Alexander the Great right up to Donald Trump, not the Great. The Afghan people have never accepted the foreign occupation of their country. You can ask the histories of the British Army itself, which was 3 times sent packing by the Afghan resistance. The Afghan people will not accept foreign soldiers on their land and never have. And they don't need anybody in Moscow to pay them. But the reality is, this story, which was planted by sections of the United States intelligence services in the New York Times, was then spread across the whole world, despite the fact it was completely baseless and had no evidence attached to it at all. It was a fact-free story and is now completely disputed by the intelligence chief of the United States himself. They said the president was briefed on this fake news story. But in fact, he was never briefed because the intelligence services chiefs themselves knew that the story was completely baseless. The question that arises, therefore, is why was this story planted? Well, we now know, because the Democrats in Congress have now tabled obstacles to Donald Trump's plan to withdraw American soldiers from the disaster of Afghanistan. Just in case you've forgotten, we invaded Afghanistan, Britain and the United States, and 1 or 2 other European countries, as long ago as 2001, or 19 years ago. The First World War lasted 4 years. The Second World War lasted 6 years. That's 10 years in total. We've been in Afghanistan almost 20 years, almost twice as long, and have achieved absolutely nothing. All the blood that was spilled, the blood of our own soldiers, the blood of American soldiers, but overwhelmingly, of course, the blood of Afghan civilians, has all been shed entirely in vain. The political situation in Afghanistan today is exactly what it was when all of this began. If the foreign forces withdrew from the country, the Taliban would be back in control before you could say Jack Robinson. And they didn't need President Putin's rubles in order to motivate them to do so. And when the Taliban are back in power, all the parents of all the soldiers that we lost there will be asking, what was all of that for? So just remember, it wasn't the Russians that were paying the Islamist fanatics in Afghanistan. It was the Americans.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Don't forget to vote on my Twitter feed. What birthday present should the National Health Service receive? My Twitter feed at George Galloway. Samson on Facebook says, Shaun Attwood is really good. He's coming up shortly. Be interesting to hear what he says Maxwell can expect in prison and what he thinks about the circumstances around Epstein's death. And Connor also says, can't wait. Shaun Attwood is always a great guest. Maisie says the British government is most likely trafficking young men and women in this country. Why are there no arrests? And Arthur says, for Maxwell to leave a safe home in France into the welcoming hands of the FBI suggests a deal has been done. Already the wheels of injustice have moved into gear. Very interesting conspiracy theory, that one. Might have some legs. We'll talk to Shaun shortly about that. Let's take some calls, though. John is in Berkshire in England. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, John.
Hi, George. Good talk show. Every Sunday as usual.
Thanks, mate.
Listen, this Prince Andrew, Epstein, Maxwell thing, this has got to come to a close. It's been going on far too long. The victims need closure. Now, Prince Andrew's got diplomatic immunity. Okay, we understand that. I believe that can only be used once. Has he already used it? Is this why he's not going to the US? Also, I think that the assets that Ghislaine Maxwell's got, get them frozen, the helicopter, the mansions, get that sold off and put the money into the NHS. That helicopter, £4 million, can save a lot of lives used as an air ambulance. And I think the Home Secretary needs to start putting the foot in to get this man over to the United States now.
Powerful, John. Many thanks for it. Sam is in Cologne in Germany. Let's talk to him. Sam, go ahead, sir.
Hello, Mr. George Galloway. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I want to talk about the fake socialists like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. Actually, they disappointed their left movement, the socialists, and also the workers. For example, Jeremy Corbyn has said in 2017 that he gonna respect the result of referendum to leave the European Union, but unfortunately that doesn't happen, and therefore they've disappointed the will of the people. And the same thing to Bernie Sanders. He said that I'm gonna fight till the end, and unfortunately he betrayed also the people, the left movement in the United States, and he called actually Joe Biden as a friend.
Oh,
Joe
yes.
Biden.
His friend.
Joe Biden.
His friend Joe Biden, yeah.
His friend Joe Biden. Joe Biden, he's a rapist. Actually, he's a war criminal. And he said also that Bernie Sanders had said that Joe Biden has voted for the war on Iraq, and he called his friend, and that's a paradox, unfortunately. And these are unfortunately they're gonna not help our movement. I mean, the left movement in the world. So therefore, they have disappointed us, unfortunately.
Well, thank you for that, Sam. I've spoken many, many times about the disappointment of Jeremy Corbyn and even Bernie Sanders, though he's not really my responsibility. But Jeremy Corbyn is a part of the British Labour movement, and therefore my relationship to his disappointment is more exact, more immediate. And if you want to know more about what I've said about that, you can look at the speeches I've given. I speak every Tuesday evening on all platforms. You can look back at the ones that we have held on these very subjects. Let me give you the number again. If you're calling us from the UK, it's 02077 982 255. That's 02077 982 255. If you're calling us from the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet at George Galloway, at RTUK News, and preferably both. And you can vote what birthday present should the NHS receive. Writing off of its private finance initiative debt is up 2 on 32%. Big pay rises still ahead, but down 1 on 39%. And free tuition fees for nurses down 1 also on 29%. Let's go to Georgie in Spalding on the NHS. Go ahead, Georgie.
Hiya, George. I hope you're doing well. You're looking in fine fettle.
Thank you. I'm in fighting form, yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Right. Now, I've gone to the PFI because I'm thinking if we write that off, then we can restructure the whole system, which it really, really needs. Because you get people promoted to their level of incompetence, being managers, etc. And then we'll get the others, like free car parking and all the rest of it. That will come into play as well. Sorry, the dog started barking.
That's okay. Do you work in the NHS, Georgie?
Yes, I do, and I've had my COVID test back because I was rather poorly at the beginning of last week, and it's negative, but I don't trust it, so I'm keeping in isolation for 7 days.
Okay. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if I was voting on this, my vote goes to A, because if you write off the PFI, you are freeing up a gigantic sum of many hundreds of millions of pounds that we are paying in debt charges on the PFI contracts. And you can use that to improve the service, improve the pay, scrap the tuition fees and so on. If you write off PFI, then you've got a lot more money to play with.
Exactly. And remember, I mean, I'm a nurse myself, but it's not just nurses, it's the whole of the workers. And what we've got is all these trusts that compete with each other rather than associating with each other. And you'll get, for example, my bugbear is the poor old porters that deal with all sorts. Some trusts, they just paid minimum wage and they do not get enhancements for weekend and anti-social hours work. Other trusts, they do get the enhancements. And it's all... it just needs sorting out. And like I say, I mean, we had the CAO of one of the trusts that I used to work in. He phoned up the ward and spoke to one of the deputy sisters. Well, he didn't, sorry, his secretary did. I corrected myself there. Saying, oh, this bloke that died of COVID, can you tell me about him? And she told the person to go forth and multiply not so many terms because basically they wanted to eulogise about this chap that never meant. The whistle blew about not enough PPE, and then he died from it. So anyway, that's my little bugbear on there today. I'll shut up, George.
No, it's a great call. A very, very sad story that, I must say. Linda on the email says, why has the government not included Portugal as an air bridge? I have just returned from 2 weeks in Borgao, she says. The people were wearing masks, social distancing, cautious and polite. The only risk I had was getting off the plane at Luton Airport, where I sat against the window and watched people pushing to get off and watched crowds of people with no masks or social distancing. The good people of the Algarve will have their economy ruined by a government that are clueless. It seems poor reward for Portugal being the oldest ally of Great Britain and all that. Jim says, they've been likely negotiating with Ghislaine for weeks. Her insurance against being murdered is that she has some very interesting pictures of some very powerful people being entertained by Jeffrey and others. The fact that she has now been discovered and arrested indicates that terms have been agreed. These are likely for a much reduced sentence and that the third party continues to hold copies, ensuring she keeps breathing. The question is, are the FBI there to A, uphold the law, or B, to protect the rich and powerful? Good question. Michael is in Clapton. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi there, George.
Hi, mate. Go ahead.
I would like to know if you could clarify your stance on the Black Lives Matter position. I'm of the view that all lives matter. and in conversation with various people, it appears I'm a racist for saying that.
No, it depends the context in which you're saying it. I mean, self-evidently, all lives matter if you're a decent human being at all. But as I put it the other week, let me repeat it. If your wife asks you if you love her, it's not the right time to say, I love everybody. It would be true to say that, but it would not be the right time to say it. If your colleague says to you, my father just died, it's not the right time to say, well, everybody's father dies. That also is true. But it's not the right time to say it when the agony of black people is all over your television screens because of the disproportionate number of them being killed and assailed by law enforcement agencies in the United States. You get me, Michael?
No, I don't, George, because I think you're not using the same sort of criteria. To say that in the two things you've just quoted, it's pretty indisputable that, you know, what you had said. But when it comes to, bearing in mind that we've all got one aim, is to crush racism.
Well, but we don't all have that one aim.
No, but fair-minded thinking people...
well, you know, tell that to the cops in the United States. You see, this is the point. This phenomenon, the proximate cause of all of this, is the deep-seated, violent racism against black people in the United States in particular, but in many other countries, including our own, around the world. Now, unless Black Lives Matter, then all lives don't matter. So what's the problem with both slogans at the same time, Michael?
Oh, I agree, but I agree.
Great.
To a certain extent, but in conversations you have with people, as soon as you say all lives matter, is what I would say was more important than Black Lives Matter, because it covers black lives.
Well,
but people tell me I'm a racist.
But that's the problem, Michael. It doesn't self-evidently. We've talked for weeks now about the number of people of colour who are killed by the security forces in the United States of America. And we know of what happened in history, not just in the United States of America, but even here. We know that much of the wealth of this country, in Glasgow, in Liverpool, in Bristol, in London, was built on the enslavement of black people. So black lives have not mattered in the past. So what's the problem with embracing the slogan, Black Lives Matter? In fact, all lives matter. But if black lives don't matter in practice, then all lives don't matter. Thanks for the call, Michael. Now, whichever platform you're watching us on, take a minute, please, to press the share button. Tell your friends about the mother of all talk shows on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. But for the first time, if you use Twitch, yes, we're on another platform now. 13 platforms we're going out on this evening, and one of them is Twitch, Twitch. Search for Moats TV, Moats TV. We've got a new account there. You can join us on Twitch from this very platform this evening. So whatever you do, share. Graham says, I selected PFI write-off because managers who agree sensible contracts at good prices are generally fiscally competent wasn't an option. And Timor says, big pay deal instead of patronising hand clapping. And Always says, NHS staff have to pay for parking at their own workplace. You couldn't make that up, could you? The height of COVID saw many crying as they were fined a penalty for exceeding their time because they were working in the hospital in a public health emergency. This abhorrent parking tax must be abolished for key workers in general and the NHS in particular. That is absolutely true. And Yoda says, you should have given Maxwell a left and right cross, George, finished with an uppercut of a Glasgow kiss. I wish I'd thought of that. Listen, the first hour is almost by, but there's 2 more hours to come. So stay tuned to the mother of all talk shows. And first, the news with Jamie Lowe.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Profits, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The rate of new coronavirus deaths is almost entirely preventable, the UK government's former chief scientific advisor has said today. Sir David King claimed that a further 27,000 excess deaths are likely between now and next April under current approaches to tackling the pandemic, and that this was unacceptable and immoral. Sir David, who has been critical of the easing of lockdown measures, said we need to look at the fastest route out of COVID-19, and the current one is not right. He said it looked as though Downing Street's policy was to maintain the current level of about 3,000 new infections per day across England. His comments come as pubs, restaurants, cafes and hair salons reopened across England on Saturday amid reports of some people apparently flouting social distancing guidelines. As new regulations cleared the path for bars to reopen on what was widely dubbed as Super Saturday, drinkers packed beer gardens and outdoor areas. Disorder in some parts of the country forced pubs to close early, with police making arrests after violent clashes. John Apperton, National Chairman of the Police Federation for England and Wales, criticised the drunken behaviour of some revellers and said that it was crystal clear that they would not adhere to the 1 metre plus rule as restrictions were eased. He tweeted, "Finished my late shift with the Hants Police Southampton City late shift, a busy shift. We dealt with antisocial behaviour, naked men, possession of Class A drugs, happy drunks, angry drunks, fights, more angry drunks, and was called a fascist pig by somebody that we tried to help." Health Secretary Matt Hancock, in contrast, said it was nice to see people out and about. Plans to adequately fund the social care sector need to be in place within a year, the head of NHS England has said. Sir Simon Stevens told the BBC the COVID-19 crisis has shone a very harsh spotlight on the resilience of the care system. He added, "I would hope by the time we are sitting down this time next year on the 73rd birthday of the NHS that we have actually, as a country, been able to decisively answer the question of how we are going to fund and provide high-quality social care for my parents' generation." If you take back the history, coming out of the Second World War, the country at that point was on austerity. We had rationing for bread and potatoes. The founders of NHS did not use that as a moment to hesitate. They said, "Let one of the legacies of the war be the creation of the NHS." There has been a world record rise in coronavirus cases over a 24-hour period, the World Health Organization has said. The new record is 212,326, with the biggest rise in infections coming in the US, Brazil and India. The previous WHO record for new cases was 189,077 on the 28th of June. In the US, there were a further 53,213 cases reported in the latest 24-hour period. ahead of Brazil and India. Across Europe, the figure rose by 19,694, but as the United States marked a somber 4th of July, with many people confined to their homes over coronavirus, President Donald Trump, in his speech on the White House lawn, made the astonishing claim that 99% of coronavirus cases in America are totally harmless. The president's assertion was without evidence and was his latest attempt to minimize the threat of the virus as it ravages the United States. In another sign of the growing rift between the West and China, Britain is poised to end the use of Huawei technology in its 5G network over security concerns. Boris Johnson is set for a major policy change after the UK intelligence agency GCHQ is believed to have reassessed the risks posed by the Chinese company. The Prime Minister decided in January to allow Huawei to play a limited role in the UK's 5G network as he defied security concerns, particularly from the US, about the firm. And finally, the US rap star Kanye West has announced in a tweet that he is running for US president, and he's already won the backing of billionaire Elon Musk. West posted a message to his 29.4 million Twitter followers suggesting he was entering the 2020 race. Tesla chief executive Musk responded to West's tweet saying, "You have my full support. If Kanye West does run, he won't be stuck for funding apart from his own money and what Musk may offer him." His wife Kim Kardashian last week sold a stake in her cosmetics company for $200 million. And that's the latest here on Sputnik. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
You're watching the mother of all talk shows, and the best guests are ours. Anya Parampil is not just one of the United States' young and up-and-coming journalists of the first rank. She's also a specialist on Venezuela, having been there, worked there, made films from there, to my certain knowledge. Indeed, I have interviewed her before about Venezuela, but I wanted to do so again because this is the week, of course, in which the Bank of England, following the policy of the British government, won their case in the High Court in London and stole $1 billion worth of gold from Venezuela. Now, as I said earlier, this is not just theft. It's the murder of London's reputation as a financial centre. No country with any sense would any longer keep its sovereign wealth banked in London, because all you need to do is fall out with the British government. They recognise your opposition unilaterally as the legitimate government, and they steal your country's sovereign wealth, and they hand it to the leader of the opposition. Although in the case of Juan Guaido, he isn't even the leader of the opposition in Venezuela. He's been deposed by the opposition in Venezuela. And of course, Venezuela wanted this $1 billion to go not to President Maduro's back pocket, but to the United Nations Development Program to fund Venezuela's fight against the coronavirus. Remember that Venezuela has a border with Brazil, where the pandemic is rampant, one of the worst, I think the second worst affected country in the world, and a border with Colombia, which ditto is ravaged by the disease. Venezuela has miraculously and through terrific social organization kept the number of fatalities from the coronavirus as one of the lowest in the world, and it wants to keep it that way. So what news from Venezuela in the wake of this London High Court decision? There's nobody better to ask than Anya Parampil. Anya, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. First of all, will it have come as a big surprise in Venezuela that the British courts found for the British government rather than the government of Venezuela?
No, George, I don't think anyone with a knowledge of the functions of the former British Empire and now how the UK has continued to act as an extension of the US empire, I don't think anyone is surprised that the courts have gone in the favor of the Bank of England and the wealthy elites of the British as opposed to ruling on the side of the Venezuelans. It's a theme we've seen in the United States as well, George. Something I've covered closely here is the battle over Citgo, which is Venezuela's largest and most expensive, highest valued international asset. We're talking about billions of dollars here worth in this refinery. Citgo, for people in the United States, is a gas station that supplies about 4% of petroleum to cars in the United States, oil for vehicles here. And many people didn't realize that it's actually owned or was owned by PDVSA, the state-run oil company in Venezuela. Up until last year, up until the initiation of the Trump administration's coup, Venezuela would ship its crude to the United States. It was refined in these facilities owned by Citgo here and then pumped out by Americans paying at the pump. But ever since sanctions restricted Venezuela's ability to export its crude to the United States, the Guaido officials
I've lost Anya. I'm so sorry about that. We'll get back to her. Don't worry. What birthday present should the NHS receive? A PFI write-off. B, a big pay rise. C, free tuition fees for nurses. And Timor says, watching Moats tonight, be enlightened with a knowledgeable lineup and the man himself, George Galloway, tackling the subjects that are the hot topics of conversation and interest to us all, including Ghislaine Maxwell. And Yoda says, no, I've done that one. Hildur says, Ghislaine Maxwell will die of COVID-19. And on Facebook, Charlie says, we're simply a captive audience for the theatre of world politics. We have no control or say of any kind, but they have to delude us into thinking that we do. And Tom says Maxwell is the most protected person on the planet. And yes, she's already done a deal with the authorities. Stephen says they want Trump out more than anything else on this planet. They will cause any event to try and destroy him. They can't assassinate him because that would be way too obvious. And Charlie says any conservative politician is guilty of a multitude of crimes. It's whether they're found out or not. And Brian says, getting the popcorn out. And on YouTube, Aussie says, Trump waddles from his golf cart to the ball, never walked 18 holes in his life. Well, he does have bad ankles, which means, of course, that he had to miss the war, unfortunately, in Vietnam. We're back in touch with Anya. Anya, you were explaining how this gas station chain in the United States, most people didn't even know it was owned by the Venezuelan government through its state holding in the oil company, PDVSA. But then Venezuela couldn't export its oil to the United States. What happened next?
What I've covered very closely and what's just been stunning to witness, George, is how the figures representing Juan Guaido in the United States, Carlos Vecchio, his ambassador to the United States, the man who served until just last month as his attorney general, Jose Ignacio Hernandez, he and Vecchio both really are just figures who work on behalf of oil companies. Vecchio himself was a lawyer, a high-level lawyer representing ExxonMobil in Venezuela in its fight against the Venezuelan government until it was kicked out of the country in 2007. And Jose Ignacio Hernandez is very important, someone that we should all know about because we don't hear about him as much as other figures, but he actually built the legal framework and assisted corporations in the United States fighting for essentially their right to liquidate Citgo. Again, this is Venezuela's largest international asset. It's its crown jewel on the world stage. And because it is now under the management of these figures, it stands to be liquidated at the order of the court in order to pay back multiple international corporations. Again, Crystalex is this Canadian mining company I mentioned. There's another one, a glass company based in the United States, OI European Group. And what these companies have done is sued Venezuela's government in court. We've now been awarded multi-billion-dollar settlements. And so in order to get paid, these companies are saying, all right, or the judge is going to say, liquidate Citgo, sell it essentially to other oil companies, meaning Exxon, the former employer of Guaido's ambassador to the United States. Anyone can buy up the refinery, the gas station, and then that money will go not into the hands of the Venezuelan people, but back into these multinational corporations which are suing the Venezuelan government. And Jose Ignacio Hernandez, Juan Guaido's attorney general, is someone who, before he was appointed attorney general by Guaido in the National Assembly, he was a Venezuelan lawyer working in the United States at Harvard University. And believe it or not, he was actually paid by multiple oil companies. And this is a story that I'm coming out with this week to illuminate this a bit more, but I've also published already some investigations on the Gray Zone about this. These multinational corporations suing the Venezuelan government actually paid Jose Ignacio Hernandez for legal testimony. He was an expert witness in these cases in order to prove that Crystalex, or these vultures that are essentially vying for a piece of Venezuela's internationally stored wealth, they called on him, paid him for his testimony in the courts to support their legal arguments against the Venezuelan government. And then when he took over as Guaido's attorney general, he actually assisted by making decisions which helped prove the legal argument, basically that Citgo, even though it was a private U.S. corporation, because it was owned by PDVSA, was something that the courts here could legitimately liquidate and turn over to these corporations. These people that represent the Guaido administration in the United States, they don't represent any people in Venezuela. They only represent multinational corporations, the oil companies that are actually succeeding while they're not succeeding in Caracas. And I don't think many of them ever thought that they would, George. Anyone who knows something about Venezuela or has been there knows that these people didn't have a chance at seizing power in Caracas. But where they have succeeded with this coup is in setting the stage with their declaration of representing Venezuela. They now have succeeded in stealing billions of dollars of this country's wealth. It's what you're seeing in the UK. It's what you're seeing in the United States. Caracas doesn't matter. All that matters are the bank accounts in New York, in London, and they have that money. They're paying themselves with that money. They're paying out foreign corporations with that money. And so this just really demonstrates, George, I think, the need for countries like Venezuela to look for a system beyond the U.S.
Totally.
And
I mean, the more you talked, Anya, the more I was agog at the idea that a country like Venezuela should have so much of its capital seizable by the United States or Great Britain, for that matter. No global South country should ever again leave a dollar or a penny in either your country or mine. This has been a long time coming. Again, as you spoke, I realized that this is exactly the playbook that they used against Iraq before they invaded and occupied it. They bled it white, seized its assets, paid themselves and paid the corporations with Iraq's money. You would have thought that people would have learned the lesson from that period. I hope they learn it now, don't you?
Absolutely, George. I think that is the lesson to come from Venezuela. You can have your country under control. You can defeat these forces at home the way Venezuela has. They've defeated this coup on multiple occasions, actual military threats made against the country. But no matter how strong or capable of surviving the political project was in Venezuela, the fact that wealth was stored in the United States and Europe just put them in a situation where, again, nobody's surprised that these courts rule in favor of the capitalists in the colonial hubs, because that's what they're designed to do. But I do have hope, George, because unlike the situation, the global situation in the lead up to the war on Iraq. Now we're decades out of the collapse of the Soviet Union. The United States is not the sole reigning power in the world anymore. In fact, something that gave me hope was last year I went to Venezuela to attend the meeting of the foreign ministers and some heads of state of the non-aligned movement, which is the largest group of countries in the United Nations, 120 member states, essentially everyone other than the United States, Canada, and European nations, Africa, Asia, the parts of the world that The Economist never includes in its maps. The parts of the world that The Economist never includes in its maps are represented by this bloc, the non-aligned movement, and they met to discuss this very issue. I was in the room when Foreign Minister Javad Zarif from Iran, pled with his colleagues saying, don't call these measures that are placed on our countries sanctions. We're not being punished for anything. This is financial terrorism. He held up his phone and he said, Google the definition of terrorism and you'll understand that this is exactly what the United States and its allies are doing to Iran, Venezuela, North Korea. Many of the countries in the room all are faced with this war. And the deputy foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Ryabkov, was actually present for that meeting, and I had the opportunity to interview him, and he couldn't underscore enough how, for the rest of the world, this is the primary focus, is building a financial system not based in London, not based in New York or Paris, but based on mutual cooperation and an alternative to the European, US-dominated system that we've faced now for over 100 years. I mean, this is the only way that these countries are going to be able to develop and survive in a sovereign and independent way, is when they really can truly operate outside of this system. And that's what Russia's working towards. That's what China's working towards now. And I think these countries are in a better position to make those moves now than they were, say, in 2001 during the lead up to the war in Iraq. Again, the United States, its objectives were defeated even in Syria. So it's been a slow defeat with a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. The impact of these sanctions cannot be overstated. People are suffering. People are dying as a result of this economic war. But I do still think there is hope, because the rest of the world is giving up on really cooperating with or seeing the United States especially as an honest partner or somewhere where you can even store your money.
Very positive note to end on. Thank you very much, Anya Parampil of The Grey Zone. Look forward to your piece this coming week on the Venezuelan situation. Thanks for joining us. Shaun Attwood is our next guest on Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. But let's take a quick break first.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
But first, that was the week that was. I look back at the 7 days in history which shaped our world for good and ill. It was on this very day, 72 years ago, that one of the greatest political and social creations came into being. It was the National Health Service, which the then Health Minister, Aneurin Bevan, launched at the Park Hospital in Manchester on July the 5th, 1948. It was based on three principles which are as true and necessary today as they were then. Firstly, that the services helped everyone. Secondly, that healthcare was free at the point of need. And finally, that care would be provided based on need rather than ability to pay. We've seen how vital our NHS is during the current COVID crisis, and has been every day since it was launched 72 years ago. But we simply must take it wholly back into public hands. We need the nationalization of the National Health Service back to what it was supposed to be. It was also today in 1811 that 7 Venezuelan Declaration of Independence was declared, when 7 provinces in Venezuela declared themselves independent of Spain. And also on this day in 1989 that the former White House aide Oliver North escaped jail for his part in the Iran-Contra affair. I was shocked when he escaped jail, absolutely shocked. The decorated Vietnam veteran was convicted of 3 out of 12 charges relating to illegal United States support for the Contra rebels in Nicaragua in the mid-1980s. Throat-cutting specialists they were. They used to cut people's throats and then hang their tongues out as ties, and I have seen it. He received, instead of jail, a 3-year suspended prison sentence and 2 years on probation. You couldn't make it up. On July 10th, one of the great meetings in musical history took place when 16-year-old John Lennon and Paul McCartney, a year younger, met with Lennon's group, the Quarrymen, and performed at a church fete. On the same day in 2000, Prime Minister Tony Blair's eldest son, Ewan, was arrested for being drunk and incapable after police found the 16-year-old lying on the ground in Leicester Square after celebrating the end of his GCSE exams with his friends, as you do. He was taken to Charing Cross Police Station, gave a false name, an old address, and a date of birth that suggested he was 18, the legal age for drinking. So the apple didn't fall far from the tree there either. On July 7th in 1947, one of the world's great conspiracy theories, or cover-ups, was launched when aliens and their spacecraft were discovered, or not, at Roswell in New Mexico. It has been debunked more times than even Donald Trump's claims, but there are still believers out there, although I don't want them to contact me. And in 1969, an inquest heard that former Rolling Stones guitarist Brian Jones drowned after taking a cocktail of drink and drugs. And on the same day in 2005, and it's one I remember well because I was a member of Parliament there, a series of bomb attacks on London's transport network killed more than 30 people and injured about 700 others. 3 explosions on the Underground left 35 dead, and 2 died in a blast on a double-decker bus. The first 3 bombs went off just outside Liverpool Street and Edgware Road stations, and on another travelling between King's Cross and Russell Square. I spoke in Parliament that afternoon in what became quite a heated exchange. It's worth looking at. 7/7/2005. On July 8th in 1099, in what was the first crusade, 15,000 starving Christian soldiers marched in religious procession around Jerusalem as its Muslim defenders looked on. And in 1965, Ronald Biggs, a member of the gang who carried out the great train robbery in 1963, escaped from Wandsworth Prison. He got out by scaling a 30-foot wall with 3 other prisoners. Biggs was free for nearly 40 years before he returned voluntarily to Britain from Brazil and was imprisoned. On July 10th, in 1940, as Britain was still digesting the miraculous Dunkirk evacuation, the Battle of Britain began as the German Luftwaffe mounted a series of attacks on shipping convoys off the southeast coast of England. Although heavily outnumbered, the British pilots put up a fierce fight and succeeded in driving off the attackers. Prime Minister Winston Churchill memorably put it this way: "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." And in 1995, 7,000 Bosnian Muslim men were massacred when Bosnian Serbs overran the United Nations safe haven of Srebrenica, and United Nations troops stood by and allowed it. And to end on a happier note, it was on July 11th, 1969, just days before the Apollo 11 landed on the moon, David Bowie released Space Oddity. And that was the week that was in our history. Let's go to Richard in Concord on Jesse Ventura. I hope it's good news, Richard. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got some exciting news for you, George. I hope you're doing well.
Thanks.
So there's a significant chance now that with enough pressure, the Green Party will do the right thing and nominate Governor Jesse Ventura. Popular opinion has been shifting as many in the party now are pushing to contest the results of the primary due to issues with the process. And to put that into context, complaints have been filed within the party as well as with the Federal Elections Commission that are in review. And I won't get into all the details because there's many, but the best example that I have is that there have been states that have chose to only put Howie Hawkins on their primary ballot, and even then he almost lost to none of the above. So there's lots of pressure within the party for a different nominee, and I think the people are hungry for a third party to be viable at this point for the left wing here in the country.
Well, we had Howie Hawkins on the show. He didn't cut much of a dash, and certainly nothing like the dash that would be cut by Governor Jesse Ventura, who is extremely well known in the country, both from his past as a military figure, as a former Navy SEAL, as a veteran of the Vietnam War, the one that Donald Trump dodged. He is, of course, the governor of Minnesota who defeated the Republicans and the Democrats in a tightly fought three-party race for governor of the state. He was also the mayor of Minneapolis, ditto, when he defeated both of these parties. He's a significant figure, a charismatic figure, and if the Green Party put him up as their candidate, I'll tell you something, he's in with a shout of winning, because you mentioned none of the above.
Oh, absolutely.
If there was a none of the above option available between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, none of the above would win.
Yeah, we wouldn't have a president if that was an option on the presidential ballot.
Exactly, exactly. So this possibility of the Green Party picking Governor Jesse Ventura, when will we know for sure, Richard?
Well, the Green Party National Convention is next weekend. It is July 11th at noon Eastern time is when it starts. And every candidate who has enough delegates will be eligible to speak. And Governor Ventura is one of those candidates. So we'll know within the next week whether the Green Party has chosen to help with the progressive movement or to stick with a dud of a candidate, as both of us seem to agree upon.
Well,
the best thing that folks can do.
I literally will pray for that outcome, and I think that Governor Ventura would immediately catapult the Green Party into every headline, into every argument, every debate. The social media would go wild with a candidate of his stature and his presence, his political heft, entering the race against these two sclerotic, old, melting men, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It would be a stunning turn of events.
I'll tell you, there's more that we can do than just pray, George. If folks want to help out, they should go to draftjesse.com and sign up for our newsletter to get volunteer opportunities, and also sign our petition at change.org/Ventura2020. We need all the popular support we can get to show the Green Party that this is an opportunity they cannot miss out on.
Bang on. Thanks for that, Richard. That's very good news indeed. Let's go to line 2, where Vinny is in East London on the Ghislaine Maxwell story. Go ahead, Vinny.
Hello, George. How you doing, mate?
Good, good. Tell me, what do you think?
I'm just thinking that, there's nobody in the world, yes, I don't know where they are. And
you wouldn't have thought so. No, not in their own country.
Oh, exactly. But they know where everybody else is. But I'm just worried about what's going to happen because I mean, what she knows, some people don't want us to know.
Sure. There's only two options, or three. Either she goes into court and sings like a canary, in which case the whole world will know just how horrific this whole Epstein operation was and who mounted it. The second option is that she commits suicide before the trial or is murdered. And the third option is that she cuts a deal with the FBI which conceals the truth about the case and grants her a very limited time in prison.
Right, but George, I like your third option, which was she cuts the deal. I think she has cut the deal beforehand because she would not be staying in America. You know, the FBI and anybody can pounce on you. She would have gone straight away to a country that has no extradition, like France. Why did she not do that? That means she feels safe in America.
Well, maybe she wasn't confident she could get out the country.
I don't know. She's got many passports. I mean, you know. Anyway, it's been lovely talking to you, George.
And you, Vinny, your scepticism...
Listen, I wish you well. I wish you well. I voted for you when you were going for mayor. Now it's your turn to be the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Vinny. God bless you. Thank you so much for that. The poll is going well. PFI write-off is now on 35%, up 3. Big pay rises, 38%, down 1. And free tuition fees for nurses, 27%, down 2. That's the poll on what your favourite birthday present for the National Health Service on its 72nd birthday would be. Let's go to Tess in Pembrokeshire in Wales on the US elections. Go ahead, Tess.
Hi, George. Wouldn't that be something? You as Prime Minister, eh? Well, one day, eh? Right, okay, I've been watching the news. Kanye running for president with the backing of Elon Musk. Right, we've had months and months and months of selection process and whittling down and debates and messing about and hassle. And then all of a sudden some, like, super rich guy comes in and says, hey, I want to be president. And another super rich guy goes, yeah, okay, I'll back you up. And that seems like it might be a goer. One could almost say you can buy your way to the presidency.
Well, I think
right?
that is truth self-evident. The last presidential election in 2016, each candidate spent $1 billion. So if you're not rich or have the backing of the filthy rich, you might as well not bother turning up. So Kanye West might be richer than the other two. I suspect he is, if you include his wife's wealth. And Elon Musk is also a very wealthy man. So I think this is the age of the independent. If the two mainstream parties can't come up with better than Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson here, or Donald Trump and Joe Biden there, well, what's not to love about other third forces, fourth, fifth, sixth forces coming onto the field? So I think it's quite an interesting development.
Well, I do too, but from what I understand, isn't it money that's holding up Jesse Ventura from running? Didn't he say that was one of the issues he had, was that he would lose employment and he
It was, but
money
that appears to have been taken care of, and he's now off and running for the Green Party nomination. The reason that's important is the Green Party is already guaranteed a spot on every ballot in every state, whereas Kanye West will have to go some to get on the ballot in every state. But as Robbie Martin said earlier, you know, most people's initial reaction to Kanye West's entry into the race was to laugh. It certainly was my first reaction. But the more you think about it, this is a guy with a totally gigantic footprint in the United States and all the money that's necessary to fight a proper campaign.
What a blast. I hope they both go. I hope they bring some interest into the election, because otherwise it's going to be just a complete nightmare.
Absolutely. Tess, thanks very much for that. Edmund says, the virus never was in Scotland. The figures were lies. Not one person tested died of COVID. That's Edmund in Carstairs. Keith says, at last, someone questioning where all the money came from. He's talking about the money that's kept the Scottish economy afloat, most of which, of course, of necessity, came from England. Will says, whoever wins, America will crumble. And Rick says, they opened the pubs and people went crazy and didn't social distance. Instead, we're drunk and having mass gatherings. The government says it's guided by science. That's a laugh. They're guided by the economy and taxes. And Constance says, there's nothing wrong with Trump mentally. He's just a money-grubbing, crass, half-educated businessman type. That's not a bad description. Let's take a quick break on that.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Hello, America. It is me, Joe Biden. I think I'm not reading a teleprompter. I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself. Myself.
Radio Sputnik.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Blimey, that sounded like Joe Biden. How could we tell if it was our own blithering idiot or him? What birthday present should the NHS receive? A PFI write-off, 35%. B, big pay rises, 38%. C, free tuition fees for nurses. You've got 10 minutes left to vote on that. Almost 1,000 of you have already on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, Shaun Attwood, author, speaker, broadcaster extraordinaire, makes a welcome return to the mother of all talk shows, because he's been the man in front on the whole Epstein-Ghislaine Maxwell case. Perfect time for Shaun to return to the show. Shaun Attwood, thank you for joining us. What was your first reaction when you heard about Ghislaine Maxwell's suicide next week?
Apparently she's going to go down with the virus next week and be critical and expire. So I interviewed Maria Farmer before she got the gag order. She was a victim who was assaulted by both Maxwell and Epstein. And seeing Maria and the other victims like Virginia on Filthy Rich recently, whereby they were in court The judge talked to them finally like they were human beings, like they weren't child prostitutes and criminals and all this stuff. Just to see and hear the utter joy in the victims now, finally, after decades of their bravery and campaigning to get this far, to bring the chief procurer, and not just a procurer, mind you, a participant in the assault of children who'd been trafficked, sexual assaults on them, to get this woman finally to justice. It's just a huge congratulations to the victims. That's what I say.
Yes, I mean, this is an important point that you've just made there. It would be serious enough if the allegation was that she was the one touring the playgrounds to procure the children for the beast, Epstein. But actually, a very significant number of these children allege that Maxwell also had sex with them, therefore also raped them. This is something that doesn't seem to have, so far, cost her the friendship of many in high society in both the US and the UK.
Especially Prince Andrew. Now, Virginia said that there was an orgy on the island, and Prince Andrew participated, Maxwell participated. There were underage girls there who'd been procured from Eastern Europe, and they were joking that they were the easiest girls to abuse because they didn't speak any English. And for Prince Andrew now to be playing the victim card, he's saying that he's not being treated like any normal person would in the US justice system. Prosecutors are leaking information about the case because he's such a big name, and they're making headlines off him. Well, yes, Prince Andrew is right in one regard. He's not being treated like anyone else in the world would be treated, because anyone else who was a conspirator in the biggest child sex trafficking pyramid scheme in US history would be SWAT team raided, would be stuck in a jail cell right now, eating green bologna sandwiches with cockroaches crawling them all over at night, and prison gangs trying to stab them to death for being a sex offender.
What was it all about, Shaun? It has to be an operation to gather compromat on powerful, rich, and important people, because that's the only explanation for the huge flows of money at the disposal of Epstein, the extraordinary interventions from the top before his first trial and conviction, and the extent to which powerful people remained friends with him even after he had been convicted. Am I right?
Prior to this interview, I just interviewed ex-CIA officer Robert Steele, and he said this is a massive intelligence agency operation, still ongoing, with units all across the country and the world, and that the boss of Ghislaine and Epstein in this case was Leslie Wexner of The Limited. And I was looking at the transactions between Epstein and Wexner and how Epstein got his wealth. And basically, it was past the parcel on all these property deals. Valuations were miraculously just increased, and then money was transferred from one to the other. So Wexner is the one now who should be being looked at, not just for fraud and money laundering, but Maria Farmer said she was assaulted at a Wexner property, and Wexner's bodyguard, who bodyguards Hollywood celebrities right now, I won't say his name, was pacing and threatening to murder her and telling her she was never going to get out of there, and she was so fearful for her life. The only way she got out was because she managed to get her dad to come and rescue her from the situation. So as this goes up the ladder, the next rung on the ladder is Wexner, but mainstream media is purporting that Epstein and Maxwell are at the head of the conspiracy. They won't dare cross that line to show what's above them. The intelligence agency apparatus, the Clinton crime family. It's the Clintons that are untouchable in this. It's Prince Andrew that's untouchable in this. But in the eyes of public opinion, Andrew is ruined, and the Clintons should be exposed next.
Well, of course, President Trump's in control for now. at least he's in office, if not in control. He's in charge of the Justice Department. He always wanted to lock her up. Why doesn't the Justice Department now proceed to lock up the Clintons?
Because the Clinton-Bush crime families have so many people embedded in all of the federal agencies and have so much power still, it's a line that won't be crossed.
You sure?
Yeah, everybody I've spoke to on this case does not feel that the Clintons will ever be held accountable, or Prince Andrew will see a day in jail.
On the latter point, I'm perfectly sure you're right about that. Now, if there was, we've both agreed, the only explanation for the things I adumbrated would be that this was much more than a sex case. It's a disgusting sex case, but it's much more than that. Has to be. The amount of money, the interventions to save him, and the ongoing friendships, even after conviction, all point to blackmail, all point to compromat. In which case, where is that? Where are the pictures? Where are the videos, Shaun?
Well, the victims have stated that they've seen control rooms, they've seen where the cameras were hidden, they know about the tapes. One of the Florida cops, Joseph Recurry, who mysteriously died in his early 50s, who was perfectly healthy, he transferred a lot of that material to his superiors who he didn't trust. I was told that by another guy who was in the Florida cops over there, John Mark Duggan, who ended up fleeing over to Russia. Now, Duggan is claiming that that information was passed to the higher-ups, not just to the CIA and corrupt parts of the FBI, but also to MI5 and MI6, because there was stuff in there that compromised Andrew.
Well, and also presumably the Israeli secret services, because there was one of the most frequent visitors to Epstein's townhouse in Manhattan was the former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak.
Well, Robert Steele said the Maxwell family, Mossad through and through, and Maxwell was bringing Epstein into that fold because they needed a man to capture men, to compromise men. That was the rationale.
Now, I'm about to run a poll, Shaun. Will Ghislaine Maxwell face a trial? A, no, there'll be a plea deal. B, there'll be a presidential pardon. Or C, that she will be jailed. Only good taste precluded us adding another option, namely that she will somehow perish from COVID-19 or hanging herself with paper sheets in a cell that isn't filmed and over which there is no guard. Which of those four options would you settle on?
I think Wexner and the Clintons will be instrumental in having her whacked. Wexner's tax attorney was taken out mob style, and the police accidentally released a report showing all of Wexner's ties to organized crime. So if Wexner was their immediate boss, they were mid-level managers, responsibility is going to fall on him like it does in the mafia, like you saw in Goodfellas. Your friends end up killing you. Now, if she doesn't end up dead, there's no way it's going to end up in a trial. When Kenneth Lay got arrested, I said to my friends, there's no way this is going to end up in a trial. Because if it's a trial, certain names are mentioned, government agencies have to take action. So if she doesn't get killed, it's going to end up in a plea bargain. And in that plea bargain, certain measures and agreements may be made to protect the higher end of the intelligence agency apparatus.
But a plea bargain still sends her to prison for many years, a fate which her father escaped by jumping off the back of his boat or being pushed off the back of his boat. That is another option, isn't it? A genuine suicide.
Anything can happen with plea bargains, because in cases like this, after watching Filthy Rich and just being moved by the victims, people all over the world are demanding justice. So what they could do is slap a big sentence on her now, And if the fix is in, there's already an understanding that down the road, when it's out of the public eye, this goes to an appeals judge. He gets the right amount of backsheesh to reduce the sentence, and she gets out without having to serve what was agreed and what was publicised in the beginning to satisfy public demand.
My goodness, how little faith you have in our justice systems, Shaun Attwood. I can't imagine what led you here. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. That's Shaun Attwood with a pungent point of view on the Maxwell-Epstein affair. The poll's already running. Will Ghislaine Maxwell face a trial? A, no, there'll be a plea deal, 56%. B, there'll be a presidential pardon, 17%. Or C, she will be jailed, 27%. You can vote right now on my Twitter feed. And already the votes are flooding in. Do I have any more social media? I do need some more because I've still got a few minutes before the break. After the break, we'll be talking, of course, as always, to Dr. Ranjeet Brar. In a week, when the coronavirus issue might be said to have reached a turning point, where the pubs are open, where Soho became a block party, which miraculously attracted no intervention by the police. Unlike the block party in Brixton, unlike the block party in the White City, the riot police didn't wade in Soho, which was literally paved with people. Duncan says Ghislaine has been charged with a very limited list of crimes, and just from the 90s, and not, I believe, with child rape. Sounds like limp plea bargaining. And Yinka says, hopefully with the arrest of Maxwell, a number of these corrupt oligarchs and politicians will be arrested and taken out of service. And Geraldine says, when authorities kill white people, 9 times out of 10, that man was given a chance to not be killed. Black people are arbitrarily being killed. And that, my friend, is the difference. And Citizen Journal says, George, you're on some form tonight. Big man. Thanks, George. I am trying to lose my coronavirus weight. But thanks. Ant says, best way to spend my birthday evening watching George Galloway. Very many happy returns to you, Ant. And Jamie says, I saw this on a sign at a protest. We said Black Lives Matter. Never said only Black Lives Matter. We know all lives matter. We just need your help with Black Lives Matter because Black lives are an immediate danger. Southampton beat Manchester City 1-0. I demand a steward's inquiry into that one. Brian says, hi George, do you have an opinion on a potential third party in the USA called Unity 2020, postulated by Bert Weinstein? I don't know who Bert Weinstein is, but his brother Eric Weinstein has an interesting podcast, The Portal on a Meeting with Epstein. I think you'd find it very interesting. We'll check that out, thanks. Joe says, go on, shoot from the hip. Tell us what you think of the future of the NHS is. This winter we will feel the effects of the coronavirus, no doubt. Is the government taking this virus seriously? We have pubs open, but no schools. We have the prospect of mass unemployment, and no one seems to be dealing with it. Educate us, George. What is the plan? Well, stay tuned, because I'll be discussing these very things with Dr. Ranjeet Brar. Let's take a call, though, from Simon in Somerset. Go ahead, Simon.
Hi, George. How are you doing?
Good, sir. Nice to hear from you.
You too, sir. Thank you for the call and your time. It was just a quick one, just to address the current moments of time. And really just to put across with relevance to the Maxwell and Epstein kind of revelations. It's just it's quite a considerable time to address it. Really, is this time to really give certain conspiracy theories that have been on the fringe some sort of validation?
Well, fire away. Give me some.
Well, is this the time to give conspiracy theories to a certain extent some validation?
Well, no, there are many,
exactly, yes.
conspiracy theories, but that doesn't mean everything is a conspiracy. Sometimes
completely
sometimes
agree.
it's a cock-up. As I always say, Simon, I've been close enough to government and known enough leading figures in government, including prime ministers, many of them. I've known personally, up close, Harold Wilson, James Callaghan. I knew, of course, John Major. I've sat under many other prime ministers, and I knew Tony Blair and Gordon Brown only too well. And my experience is that most things are a cock-up rather than a conspiracy. That our leaders are Mr. Bean rather than James Bond. But there are plenty of conspiracies. I don't believe for a moment that Jack Kennedy was killed only by Lee Harvey Oswald. Not for a moment. I don't believe for a moment that we know everything there is to know about what happened on 9/11, for example. And I don't believe for a moment that the Epstein-Maxwell case is only about sex. Not for a moment. Simon?
Yes. I mean, exactly on your side there, and that's why I'm an avid follower and agreement in the majority of your points. I feel that there was quite a certain distancing from certain callers previously that have, it's valid with all the crazy conspiracies going out there at the moment, that you have to distance yourself on a platform like yourself, that you have to distance yourself.
Well, you do, yeah. I mean, if something, of course. As I always say, Simon, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, the chances are it is a duck. Thanks very much for a wonderful call. Bringing us to the news. My goodness, that hour went in quickly. The news with Jamie Lowe, but stay tuned.
Curious
Dr.
about our
Ranjeet
curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The rate of new coronavirus deaths is almost entirely preventable, the UK government's former chief scientific advisor has said today. Sir David King claimed that a further 27,000 excess deaths are likely between now and next April under current approaches to tackling the pandemic, and that this was unacceptable and immoral. Sir David, who has been critical of the easing of lockdown measures, said we need to look at the fastest route out of COVID-19, and the current one is not right. He said it looked as though Downing Street's policy was to maintain the current level of about 3,000 new infections per day across England. His comments come as pubs, restaurants, cafes and hair salons reopened across England on Saturday amid reports of some people apparently flouting social distancing guidelines. As new regulations cleared the path for bars to reopen on what was widely dubbed as Super Saturday, drinkers packed beer gardens and outdoor areas. Disorder in some parts of the country forced pubs to close early, with police making arrests after violent clashes. John Apperton, National Chairman of the Police Federation for England and Wales, criticised the drunken behaviour of some revellers and said that it was crystal clear that they would not adhere to the 1 metre plus rule as restrictions were eased. He tweeted, "Finished my late shift with the Hants Police Southampton City late shift, a busy shift. We dealt with antisocial behaviour, naked men, possession of Class A drugs, happy drunks, angry drunks, fights, more angry drunks, and was called a fascist pig by somebody that we tried to help." Health Secretary Matt Hancock, in contrast, said it was nice to see people out and about. Plans to adequately fund the social care sector need to be in place within a year, the head of NHS England has said. Sir Simon Stevens told the BBC the COVID-19 crisis has shone a very harsh spotlight on the resilience of the care system. He added, "I would hope by the time we are sitting down this time next year on the 73rd birthday of the NHS that we have actually, as a country, been able to decisively answer the question of how we are going to fund and provide high-quality social care for my parents' generation." If you take back the history, coming out of the Second World War, the country at that point was on austerity. We had rationing for bread and potatoes. The founders of NHS did not use that as a moment to hesitate. They said, "Let one of the legacies of the war be the creation of the NHS." There has been a world record rise in coronavirus cases over a 24-hour period, the World Health Organization has said. The new record is 212,326, with the biggest rise in infections coming in the US, Brazil and India. The previous WHO record for new cases was 189,077 on the 28th of June. In the US, there were a further 53,213 cases reported in the latest 24-hour period, ahead of Brazil and India. Across Europe, the figure rose by 19,694, but as the United States marked a somber 4th of July, with many people confined to their homes over coronavirus, President Donald Trump, in his speech on the White House lawn, made the astonishing claim that 99% of coronavirus cases in America are totally harmless. The president's assertion was without evidence and was his latest attempt to minimize the threat of the virus as it ravages the United States. In another sign of the growing rift between the West and China, Britain is poised to end the use of Huawei technology in its 5G network over security concerns. Boris Johnson is set for a major policy change after the UK intelligence agency GCHQ is believed to have reassessed the risks posed by the Chinese company. The Prime Minister decided in January to allow Huawei to play a limited role in the UK's 5G network as he defied security concerns, particularly from the US, about the firm. And finally, the US rap star Kanye West has announced in a tweet that he is running for US president, and he's already won the backing of billionaire Elon Musk. West posted a message to his 29.4 million Twitter followers suggesting he was entering the 2020 race. Tesla chief executive Musk responded to West's tweet saying, "You have my full support. If Kanye West does run, he won't be stuck for funding apart from his own money and what Musk may offer him." His wife Kim Kardashian last week sold a stake in her cosmetics company for $200 million. And that's the latest here on Sputnik. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Will Ghislaine Maxwell face a trial? A, no, there'll be a plea deal, 56%. B, a presidential pardon, 17%. C, she will be jailed, 27%. Of course, A and C are not mutually exclusive, but you can vote now on my Twitter feed, @George Galloway. Have your say on what you think is going to happen in the Ghislaine Maxwell case. And I must say the cynicism of our viewers and listeners is quite overwhelming. Faith in the American injustice system virtually non-existent. Anyway, it's the 72nd birthday of Britain's National Health Service, which once upon a time was the jewel in our crown. It was a model which other countries envied or emulated. But as it reaches 72 years old, it's more than creaking under the weight of the so-called reforms and the financial punishment which it has taken, especially over these austerity years since 2008, a long time in anybody's lifetime. So who better to say happy birthday to than Dr. Ranjeet Brar, physician and surgeon and Moats' own medic. Dr. Ranjeet, thank you very much for joining us again. We'll come on to the NHS more generally, but you'll have heard on our news bulletin there, the last 24 hours has been a world record for new coronavirus 19 cases. The best part of 250,000 new infections in 24 hours. This isn't going away, is it? In fact, if it ever did go away, it's coming back with a vengeance.
Thanks, George. Pleasure to be with you. And I will say happy birthday to the NHS, and we'll come back to that question, as you say. But you're quite right. The NHS is facing really a kind of perfect storm in terms of the prevailing systemic conditions, and the coronavirus certainly has a part to play in that. Looking at the world, there's been 1.5 million cases since we last spoke 1 week ago, George. So we're coming up now to 11.5 million cases in the world, with over 540,000 deaths. And as you say, every day in the United States now, it's really running rampant out of control. And of course, both the US healthcare system and the Trump administration, as well as the federal structure of the government, without clear guidelines as really who's to take responsibility for controlling the pandemic, has had a huge impact on that. But more than 55,000 cases every day for the last 3-4 days is a huge toll. But of course, then we've seen increasing impact in the third world, in the BRICS countries. Brazil now has over 1.5 million cases. India has recognized that it's got 700,000 cases, probably has many more, and still not accurately recording either the number of cases or the number of deaths. So, as the testing increases, we'll find more and more of the virus, no doubt. But equally, it's true to say that the virus is really running rampant around the entire globe as we speak, George.
And there's no sign yet of anything meaningful we can do about it. Unless, of course, one is lucky enough to get one of the US-purchased prophylactics, which they have purchased. Virtually every single unit in the whole world has been bought by the United States. The drug companies will charge a king's ransom for those. There's no guarantee that they'll save your life in any case, and are only useful if you're already suffering from it. No vaccine. This is quite a frightening time to be squeezing into a crowded public house, isn't it? Or filling the streets of Soho in London with thousands of people drinking and carousing.
Several components to your question, George, and all of them are quite powerful and valid. This drug, remdesivir, which is a nucleotide analog, so it's a bit like an RNA molecule, but doesn't assemble correctly into the genetic structure of the virus when it's reassembling. It's been trialed and found to slightly reduce the duration of illness, but not actually reduce the total mortality of the disease. So it does have probably some effect, though actually the randomized controlled trial, which led to its adoption in the United States, has been widely criticized. There was a paper I've just read in the BMJ which criticized it as having a lot of loss to follow-up, not following up all of the patients, the trial being poorly randomized, and so basically poorly conducted, and then drawing a question mark over the results. Nevertheless, let's assume that it's correct and it does have some positive impact. It's very telling, really, that the United States is supremely arrogant. I mean, the United States for a long time has essentially conducted its foreign policy on the basis that the life of an American it doesn't have parity with the life of human beings elsewhere. There's lots of evidence to attest to that. But certainly if you think that the United States, when they thought there was a vaccine that might be developed, Trump tried to buy up that company, even though it was a German company, so that and give exclusive use of the potential vaccine to the United States. And he's done a similar thing with Gilead, who produced this drug. This drug is actually produced in California. Gilead have a limited ability to produce it. You can look at the workings of capitalism even further and say, look, Gilead's share price has gone up 20 to 30% within this pandemic, precisely because there were hopes for this drug, and this trial, which is probably poorly conducted, has boosted their share price still further. And more than that, if you look at the special laws surrounding drugs, they were very keen to get something called an orphan drug status for this drug, which essentially is something that they would normally roll out for a drug for a very rare disease, to ensure that they're the only people who are allowed to produce it for 7 or 8 years, and therefore they're going to reap back the full profit. Now, in a pandemic, it's hardly a rare disease, it's a worldwide crisis, but they want to limit the profit to their own company, but that would mean also obviously limiting the treatment offered to the world. So you can see what motivates, on the one hand, these massively lucrative enterprises. They're solely concerned with the profit they can generate from this world crisis, rather than come up with the best way to tackle the health emergency. And that is very typical, and we've seen that roll out in many different ways during this pandemic. But coming back to the latter part of your question, is this a good time to be easing lockdown? Look, the rates are down. Leicester is a particular case. And again, you can see the poor response of the NHS has been conditioned by those pressures of privatization that you were talking about. If we look at testing, it's been Deloitte who's been in charge of the testing. We look at tracing, it's been Serco who've been put in charge of tracing. If we look at the PPE and the Nightingale hospitals, it's been a coalition of KPMG or consortium rather of KPMG and Deloitte. So this COVID-19 laws that have gone through on the back of the emergence of the pandemic and the closing down of Parliament, together with anyway the proclivity of the current government and previous governments over a long period of time to increasingly farm out the responsibilities of the health service to public care, albeit under an NHS, to private care, albeit under an NHS guideline, has led to a very disjointed response where, for example, in Leicester, the local council was saying they didn't realise they had that many tests, precisely because actually a large number of the private tests are in fact farmed out to another private company, which is the Lighthouse Labs, in conjunction with Amazon, with Boots, with Royal Mail. So a whole consortium of private interests are coordinating in a very loose way, which is leading to very poor sharing of information and no single body. And certainly, it's led to a system of kind of a feeling of despair within the NHS staff that they actually, despite having the expertise to deal with the pandemic, don't have the power to reorganise their health service and actually manage the government response in an appropriate way, George.
That was a dazzling description of where we are. Where would you prefer we were, or prefer we were heading to? This is the birthday of the NHS. Let's hope it has many happy returns. But for them to be happy, what needs to happen, Doctor?
Well, George, I don't think that we can trust the National Health Service in the hands of governments who, over a 40-year period, have made it very clear that their intention is to privatise the National Health Service. If we look back at the Thatcher administration, John Redwood and Oliver Letwin published a document which basically was about how to privatise public services, and particularly focused on the NHS. And that document was called Britain's Biggest Enterprise. And they have an absolute will and desire to turn over all of the money, very considerable revenue of the state, to private companies, and that would involve privatising national services, including the National Health Service, amongst others. It's particularly the case with the National Health Service that it's under persistent pressures to try and farm it out to different providers. The idea initially was to just get peripheral services, so, canteen services or hospital maintenance services. But it's been gradually picking away at the pie until actually a huge, probably the majority of the National Health Service is privatized. And a whole variety of groups provide services, including peripheral and core medical and incidental services, consortia of private finance initiatives of banks take huge chunks of the NHS capital. Drug companies obviously take huge amounts of the capital. So this is the pattern, and far from reversing that trend, it was during this pandemic, it's been used to further push that same agenda. So how can we stop it from happening? Well, first of all, we need to realize it's happening. I still would recommend all of your viewers, if they've not watched it, to watch Bob Gill's excellent movie, which is available on his channel, which is about the privatization of the NHS. It's a fantastic film, and we'll put the information up and I hope people will watch that. So becoming aware of it, they can get him to come and speak at local events and see just how this is being done. But increasingly, it's clear to me that there needs to be a broad public campaign of the use of the NHS themselves. There's no doubt that that the clapping for the NHS is very sincere, it's very real. If we go back to the 2012 Olympics, when we put on a huge show, really, of the world of just how proud we were of the NHS. I know people who were involved in that. Britain has shown how grateful it is to have this facility of caring for our sick and our needy when we most need it. But if we don't step up to defend it, realize the ways in which it's being challenged, whittled away, eaten away, I'm afraid to say that we're going to be left with a system which looks very much like the US system. And if we look at just how that COVID pandemic is running rampant, out of control in the United States, you realize just how inefficient it is. It's the most expensive healthcare in the world, and it's the most inequitable, and leaves a vast number of the population, at least 60 million people, without any healthcare whatsoever in the richest nation on earth. And that is not a model of healthcare that we want to see. Our healthcare is no longer run by the government. It's been farmed out to a quango, a quasi-autonomous non-governmental authority led by Sir Simon Stevens, and that's NHS England. And it's NHS England that we recently found out this week was actually watching the figures, which had issued instructions to discharge patients with COVID from hospital into care homes to create beds in the NHS. And they became aware, and they were watching an increased rate of infections within care homes. And during this pandemic, they say 66,000 people have died within care homes. They say 20,000 of them from COVID, but many of those will be without testing, so that numbers could be far more. So there's gross mismanagement. It's not, the management of the NHS is not being run by the clinicians. There's a constant mantra every time they introduce a new wave of privatization that is about clinical excellence. It's about putting clinicians in control. But I'm afraid it's a gross lie. Funding has been put out to clinical commissioning groups. Those clinical commissioning groups are groups of GP nominally, but they don't have the capacity to plan. They're increasingly put with groups such as KPMG and the big four accountancy companies, and American insurance industry, particularly United Health, is being invited in to oversee and run that, and is being driven very far down the line of privatization. It's up to the British people, really, to prevent that from happening. And the first step to that is an increased knowledge and vigilance, George.
I'll be lucky to see 75, certainly lucky to see 80, unless these things are reversed.
I think that's right. I think there is a campaign to try and address certain issues of it, particularly the NHS, the Health and Social Care Act 2012, which was an act which removed the responsibility of the Minister of Health for providing healthcare to all Britons and transferred that over to this quango, NHS England. It also advanced the privatisation agenda in other ways. And I certainly think we should, I think in line with your poll that you're running tonight, George, demand the end to the profiteering from the private finance initiative. They've made their money several times over already. Yeah. It's well within the ability of a government to cancel that source of debt at a stroke, and that would be to the great benefit of every citizen of Britain. It's something that we should all get behind and demand of our politicians.
Bravo. Thank you very much, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, Moats medic, who has helped us through this entire emergency. Will Ghislaine Maxwell face her trial? A, no, there'll be a plea deal. B, no, there'll be a presidential pardon. C, yes, she will be jailed. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Let's hear from Vincent in High Wycombe. Go ahead, Vincent.
Oh, hi, George. How you doing?
Good. Nice to hear from you. What would you like to say?
Yes, I want to talk about the Black Lives Matter and police brutality.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that. Do you think that police are just hunting down black people in the street?
In America, oftentimes, yes. And in Britain, far more times than we would like to acknowledge.
Well, the stats don't say that's true, because I've got statistics from the Wall Street Journal, from the Washington Post, and the amount of victims of African Americans killed in 2019 by police is 0.1%.
Well, that's not true. Well, 0.1% of what?
Of all homicides, black homicide victims.
No, isn't a better statistic what proportion of people killed by law enforcement were people of colour? And I can assure you, that statistic. That's utter nonsense.
That's true, and the police officers are 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black male than unarmed black male is to be killed by a police officer.
Well over 1,000 people last year in America were killed by law enforcement. The great majority of them were people of colour. This is a fact.
No, this is not, George.
So
in
what you're
2019,
saying, Vincent, are you saying 99% of people killed by law enforcement in the US were white?
George, I've got the stats here.
Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying?
In 2019, the officers shot 1,004 people, which were armed or otherwise dangerous. African Americans, about a quarter of those killed.
No, you said zero. You said less than 1%.
Yeah, but that's of the black homicide victims. It says here in the Wall Street Journal on the Washington Post
you're comparing apples with oranges. Over 1,000 people were killed by law enforcement last year in the United States. We don't know if they were armed and dangerous, as you appear to know. Let's deal with the number. I'm telling you that the great majority of that 1,000 plus people killed by law enforcement were either black or Latino or otherwise minority ethnic communities. That's a fact. That's a fact.
They commit 53% of the homicide offenders in the US, and they represent 13% of the population.
I could see, Vincent, that you have an agenda in this conversation. Actually, I'm proud to say I worked out in the first 25 seconds of what you said. The great majority of people killed by law enforcement last year and every year in the United States are people of colour. Goodbye. Now, if you want to have your say on the Ghislaine Maxwell issue, will she stand trial? What do you think? You can call in now. Let me give you the numbers: 02077 982 255, or you can call us from the US on 001 757 744 4480. Paul is in Glasgow on the furlough scheme. Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, hi, George. Hi there. So, you were touching into the show. I'm a really big fan. So your question earlier on was how would Scotland have been able to afford the furlough scheme had it not been for the UK government? The simple answer to that would be if Scotland would be independent, and if it was independent, it would pay for the furlough scheme in exactly the same way as the UK government, i.e. taxation, VAT, borrowing, possibly quantitative easing. So
quantitative easing of which currency?
The pound.
But you'll not be allowed to use the pound. Do you think the Bank of England is going to allow you to quantitatively ease its currency?
It's our
what
currency
school did you
well.
go? What school
it's
did
our currency
Paul,
as well.
Which school did you go to?
It's our currency as well, and this is something that you fail to take into account.
if you are seriously saying on an international television and radio program that the Bank of England would allow independent Scotland to quantitatively ease its Bank of England currency, then are you just out for the weekend?
Right, so just to put that aside.
No, I'm not putting that aside. I'm not putting that aside. No, I'm not putting that aside. No, I'm not putting it aside.
Oh,
because it demonstrates.
You're just going to bully me through. You're just going to bully me through your show, aren't you?
No, you're the person.
Just bully me through your show.
Can you turn him down for a moment, and then we'll bring him back? I'm not letting it go, because never have I been lucky enough to find a Scottish nationalist demonstrate the absolute economic illiteracy with which they approach the issue of independence than you, Paul. You are a prize exhibit. You can't count. You obviously never went to school. You are economically imbecilic. You came on this show and claimed that the British government would allow an independent Scottish government to quantitatively ease the British pound, which you have already left, in order to pay your furlough. Over to you, Paul.
It's our pound as well. You can use whatever currency we like, and you know that's true. In the same way that countries like Panama use the US dollar, we will use the pound, and nobody can do anything about it. You will use the pound
if the British government allows you to use the pound.
Look, the US government doesn't want the countries like Panama to use the US dollar, but
actually
they can do nothing about it.
No, actually they do.
There's numerous countries across the world who use the US dollar, and the Yanks don't like it, but they can do nothing about it. You can use whatever currency you want.
Paul, calm down. The US government would never allow the government of Panama to print dollars. Am I right?
Say that again?
The US government would never allow the government of Panama to print US dollars. Am I right?
So you just want to focus on that.
Right?
But the point I'm trying to make is that Scotland would have, as an independent country, we would have the ability to borrow money. We would be in charge of our own fiscal rules.
Who would lend you?
Taxation.
Who would lend you money?
We would say,
Paul, you're going to need to stop talking.
Money. What was the natural?
What are you on, Paul? Are you taking something?
With all the natural resources that we've got, we wouldn't be allowed to.
Paul, you're going to need to slow down, because this is not a conversation. This is you with a long playing record playing at 45 RPM. This is rote.
I'm just making the point that Scotland would have handled it in the same way.
I'm asking you questions. And it's this. Would the US government allow the government of Panama to print US dollars? Yes or no?
Can we move on from this?
No, we're not moving on from it until you answer it. Are you going to answer it? All right, off you go. Paul, off you go. Because you're not on here to have an argument. You're on here to hysterically prattle. So much so that I'm actually worried about your blood pressure. So I'm doing you a favour by allowing you to get back to your books, because you've got a lot to learn. But this demonstrates the absolute economic innumeracy and illiteracy of the idiots running the campaign to break up Britain. And I've got news for you, Paul. I'm back. I'm back in Scotland. I'm on the field of battle. And what you got away with the Scottish Labour Party, you ain't going to get away with me. Now, I better take a 1 minute break.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Radio Sputnik, we speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Well, most people in the polls seem to think there'll be a plea deal. Few people think there'll be a presidential pardon. I think that's right, because I can't see what Donald Trump would have to gain from that. 21% only think she'll see the inside of the jail. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Dell says on Twitter, this loony Paul is what we have to listen to on a daily basis up here, George. You wipe the floor with them. Ha, 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 ha. Well, I'll tell you what, their backsides are twitching since I announced in the last day or two that I'm back in Scotland. And on YouTube, Keel says deaths are steadily going down in the USA. There are more cases because they're testing more. I guess health professionals can't do maths. That's signed Donald J. Trump. John says, I can't understand one word of that guy from Glasgow. And Jay says, at work, everyone wears a mask beside me, and they even follow social distancing. Well, someone brought in the flu, and now everyone has it beside me, and no one can answer why their mask didn't work. And Ashley says, Gigi has the best guests and friends. And on Facebook, Wolf says, greedy corporations should not be running public health care. And Bill says, Vincent, have a day off, son. Now, my editor, Ron Mackay, gives me this. How's this for a good news story? 18-year-old Moussa Juwara scored for Bologna in their shock win over Inter Milan today. He came to Italy as a refugee from the Gambia on a boat alone, aged 14. He started playing for a youth team near Potenza and was adopted by his coach. And he scored his first goal in Serie A today against Inter Milan. How's that? Steve is in Washington. I don't know if it's D.C. or in the state of Washington. We'll find out. Steve, go ahead.
Yes, it's the state of Washington.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
Two of the subjects that you've been touching on today, I follow you, by the way. I enjoy you very much.
Thank you,
Two of the subjects you've been on today, one, the COVID, and two, the American elections coming up. I believe there's one person that would make a very, very interesting guest for you, and his name is Brett Weinstein. He is an evolutionary biologist, very, very, very based in scientific methods, and brother to Eric Weinstein, who I believe you have some knowledge of.
Yes, he was mentioned earlier on in the show, actually. Yeah, we'll look at that.
He's put forward a proposal called Unity 2020, where he's offering a third option to the Democrats and the Republicans. And his proposal had involved Andrew Yang and a retired military man named Ravenbrook. And I really don't have enough legs in this myself to give you...
But Andrew Yang is supporting Joe Biden.
I understand. but you should look or listen to why he's putting it forward the way he does. He's not saying it.
I promise I'll check it out. I'll check it out. Steve, thanks for that call. I need to press on. There's a lot of people trying to get on. Ian is in Hounslow in London on the NHS. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George. I just want to follow on from Dr. Brar.
Yeah.
I'm a retired NHS nurse myself, and I lost my wife 10 years ago to medical negligence.
Wow.
So this is something quite... I don't want to go into that because that'll take too long and I'll get too upset.
Mm-hmm.
But what I want to talk about is the bleeding wound the past 12 months of 83.4 billion wasted on medical negligence payouts to people who've died and suffered needlessly due to medical bungling. And this is causing a hole in the NHS budget and also a misery to the people who've been at the receiving end.
That's a staggering number, and I'm amazed to hear that.
Well, now...
That's a lot of negligence.
It's all to do with these stupid quotas of things being rushed to meet targets and mistakes are being made. That's the root cause of it.
Wow. £83 billion a year.
Spaffed up the wall.
Staggering number. Ian, thanks. We'll ask Dr. Brar to respond to that next week, God willing. Thanks very much indeed for that call. The poll is doing great numbers. Will Ghislaine face a trial? No, there'll be a plea deal. Overwhelming support, 67%. Let's hear from Julian in London on Ghislaine Maxwell. Go ahead, Julian.
Hello, George. I can't believe they found Ghislaine in Manchester.
Who'd have thunk it? Who'd have thunk it?
Manchester-on-Sea, that is. And when I saw the house that she'd been hiding in, it reminded me of when they found bin Laden living in a house in Pakistan.
It was rather nicer than his house. It was a $1.1 million cottage in the forest called Tucked Away. Well, she definitely was tucked away.
She was tucked away. I hope she's not put away. Well, I hope she's put away and not done away with.
Yes,
but
we must all hope that.
Yeah.
We must all light a candle for poor Ghislaine, who even now doesn't know she's going to commit suicide next week.
Well, little do we know what will happen. But
no, you're right.
Of course,
that
was the last. Well, we don't know, but bin Laden was killed for the final time after he got captured. So I think your next poll should not be will Ghislaine Maxwell be killed, but how many times will she be killed?
Well, I mean, I wish her, of course, the health to survive long enough to appear in court and to answer the charges that have now been leveled against her, both in the initial indictment but also in the testimony of dozens of children who claim that she participated in the sexual assaults on her.
That was a good point.
So I don't wish her to come to any harm until she's appeared in court to face these charges and justice is seen to be done. Julian, many thanks for that call. Daniel is in Seattle on the protests in the United States. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hello, George. Thank you. It's good to see you. I love your show.
Thank you.
I'm calling in because
have we lost Daniel? I must read you while we're trying to get back to Daniel that my editors just pointed out that medical negligence paid out in 2019 in England £2.36 billion a year. Pounds last year in 2019, which is still a staggeringly high number, but of course nothing like as staggering as the one Ian said in the earlier call. Daniel's back in Seattle. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Hello, George.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Well, George, I'm calling in about the CHOP protests, the Black Lives Matter protests in Seattle.
Yeah.
I do social media for several nonprofit organizations, and I had the unfortunate experience the other night being online and watching this car drive through the protesters in real time.
Yeah, two women were seriously injured, yeah?
Yes, one died yesterday.
Oh, one died. Oh, my goodness. I didn't know that. I'm sorry.
Summer Taylor was her name, and she was a 24-year-old woman from Seattle. Actually, I think she identified as binary, but she died Saturday night in Harborview Medical Center, and the other woman, her name is Diaz Love. She's 32 years old from Portland. She is in serious conditions and still in the hospital. God, I hope she makes it through. I mean, it's been a punch in the gut for Seattle.
Did they immediately arrest the driver who deliberately mowed these women down?
Yes, they did. They did arrest him. He did sort of try to make a getaway. The whole thing doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense because the freeway was closed down. People have to understand that the protesters every night went on the freeway. And the police, the State Patrol rather, in this case, and the Department of Transportation said, okay, we'll close the freeway down for safety. And they would block off the entrances to the freeway and put a barricade across the freeway. This man accessed the freeway by going the wrong way on a ramp because he wanted to get on the highway and mow. He must have been going. I don't know if you've seen the film.
I haven't. No.
It's. I recommend that you don't look at it unless you have a strong stomach. But he mowed these two young girls down. They were actually dancing on the freeway, and the cops knew this. The cops didn't. This is Seattle. It's a revolutionary place. And also, the final thing I'd say, George, is there's been a big, I think, misinterpretation or propaganda about SHOP, about the autonomous zone they started here. It no longer exists. They cleared it several days ago. But it's been a vocal point by Trump, and basically saying a bunch of BS about what's going on there. It's young kids. They're experimenting. A lot of them are newly political. It's just pretty much, a wonderful place. A lot of, it's a Seattle type of place. So
yeah,
anyway,
I know Seattle well. I've spoken there more than once. Thanks, Daniel, for that. And we must pray that the second of the two victims survives this horrific, deliberate attempt to murder her. Brian is in Glasgow, but wants to talk about Joe Biden. Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, Joe. Joe, I was going to say, sorry, George.
No problem.
George, since then you did announce that you're going to be coming to Scotland. I was hoping that therefore I could ask you a question about that.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
You sure? Just I'd like to prepare you for it. What would you intend to do about family law and the Children Act, which are currently reviewing in a very mysterious way, I would say, because of the shutdown of things like the Scottish Law Commission? They're doing it under the cover of COVID-19. But there are certainly issues there regarding incompatibility, regarding the status of unmarried fathers and the children of unmarried fathers, who are the majority. It doesn't sit compatible with their ECHR rights. It's incompatible with parental rights and other stated principles in law. The 2006 Family Law Scotland Act, which my case was central to influencing and was quoted, that act did not address the substantive issues in my case, which was I was absent from my daughter's certificate, and that's the only conditionality now men enjoy as of 2006, something close to the equivalent of a vote that they have to their children, and it doesn't reflect nature, it doesn't reflect ECHR, doesn't reflect the key tenets of Scottish law, and any parliamentarian should be able to question their ability to legislate.
Well, look, Brian, I'm not up to commenting in detail on your case or the act itself. I should tell you, I'm not coming there to be a parliamentarian, so I'll not be able to pass that. I'm coming back into Scottish politics for one purpose only, and that is to try and defeat the perpetual hamster wheel politics in which the country is currently locked. I have only one purpose in Scottish politics, and that is to help and try to unite others to defeat the SNP so that real politics in Scotland can begin again, like the issue that you have raised, like issues of education, of health, of the economy, of transport, of policing, of all the things that normal people argue about. Real politics. As long as Scotland is locked down into a perpetual constitutional mania over whether or not there's going to be another referendum on whether or not Scotland is going to be independent or not. We have to get away from that. That's my purpose. I've got no other purpose, Brian.
George, absolutely on the same hymn sheet with you. Fantastic. And can I say that's my whole point with them. If you actually were going, I can send you all. I did send you a letter of some of that. I've been corresponding with Police Scotland to the extent that I think they are derelict in their duty. And the way they are grouping us to their political machinations, which, as you say, are almost distraction points from their inability to be effective in any sense with regards to the remit. They are politically
Brian,
almost a cultural maze in self-interest.
Exactly. Well, Brian, for example, a significant number of vigilantes gathered at the border yesterday in their spacesuits, their Chernobyl suits, screaming at English people to get the F out of Scotland, and the police were standing there and did nothing about it. Why? If they had been shouting at black people, if they'd been shouting at Jewish people, if they'd been shouting at Catholic people, something would have had to be done. It is surely at least a public order offence to be trying to be singling out English people at the border coming across. All the while, by the way, when aeroplanes are landing in Edinburgh and Glasgow with thousands of foreign, not British, foreign visitors to spend money in Scotland without even so much as their temperature being taken. What kind of police force allowed that yesterday? Stood by while it all happened, in all its ugliness.
George, I have stated quite clear to the Police Scotland in email, and I can send you a copy, that if Police Scotland don't start having a word, even privately, with the members of Parliament about their behaviour, as I interact with them, I will start reporting middle management. I will find some way to prove, because like you just said there was definitely at least a Section 38 causing fear and alarm and attacking people for a protected status in this case.
Exactly. What if I'd been there? What if I'd been there with my children in the car? And a guy in a Chernobyl suit is screaming, "Get the F out of Scotland," in my car window.
A child couldn't wipe that from their memory. I know, exactly.
Brian, thank you very much indeed. I need to press on. Alas. There's Bill in Scotland on Ghislaine. Go ahead, Bill. No, he's not there yet. Let's go, therefore, to Joshua in London.
Are you right, George?
Good, mate. Go ahead, quickly.
Yeah, I was going to just ask about, well, you know, the international scapegoat strikes again, that being Russia, of course.
Yes.
You know,
We're the whipping boys. Although it might be China next week. You never know.
I think it's probably a combination of both. They're sort of on that little
Exactly.
Axis of blame wordiness, reprehensibility, I think is the word.
Yes.
Anyway, I was just going to ask, while I do believe, can easily believe that Russian oligarchs donated to the Conservative Party's campaign in 2019.
They did.
Okay.
They would appear to have done so big time.
Yeah, no, I acknowledge that, and there's no point denying it, but I mean, the idea that they would hack the Leave referendum campaign when it would play right into the hands of the Remain side by saying, by tainting the Leave campaign as a foreign agent when it was supposed to be a patriotic nationalistic movement. I know for us it wasn't. We didn't vote necessarily for those same reasons as a lot of them did, but it would be self-defeating in practice for Russia to meddle in that, to besmirch the Leave campaign, because it would just discourage people from voting to leave.
Well, look, Joshua, the idea that the voters in Sunderland were waiting for a communique from Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin to tell them that membership of the EU was not a good thing for them, hadn't worked out very well for them, is utterly absurd. And of course, they keep talking about Russians. Oligarchs are living in London from Russia to get away from the Kremlin, to get away from President Putin. They're living here in London because they've got something to run away from Russia for. The idea that because a Russian oligarch gives money to Boris Johnson's election campaign, that this is somehow the Russians, it's the opposite of the truth. These are Russians that Putin hates and who hate Putin. Got to go, Joshua. Bill is in Scotland, probably the last call. Bill, go ahead.
George, I'm calling just to mention about Maxwell.
Yes.
And it's quite clear that she will do a deal, just as sure as her father couldn't do the backstroke. She will do a deal.
He never got the chance to do the deal, did he?
No, he was too busy scuba diving.
Yeah. What's your take on that, Bill? I was quite heavily involved in it at the time, and the fact that he disappeared off the boat. As a lot of people think he committed suicide, but I knew Robert Maxwell quite well, and he never struck me as the sort of man that would commit suicide.
I remember you being involved at the time, and yes, I knew of him only through the papers. My take on it is that he didn't fall, that he didn't jump overboard. Was he pushed? I don't know.
Well, he either jumped, or he fell, or he was pushed. I think the jury's out still on which of these three options actually happened, Bill. But you reckon that Ghislaine will sing? Will she sing on Prince Andrew?
Oh, she'll sing like a bird, but where it goes from there, I don't know. She will sing. There's no doubt about that, to save her ass.
She's facing 35, 40 years in Sing. Never mind Sing. Bill, thanks for the call. I've got to clear the line because there's a legend on the line, and you know the rules. The deck has to be cleared because it's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, my lovely Norma.
Hello. It's not relevant to the programme, which I've been listening to, but this is my thought for the day.
Okay.
On television, I watched this programme about the philosopher Socrates.
The greatest,
the
yes.
Greek.
Yes.
And he lived about 2.5 centuries ago.
Yes.
And he searched for the truth. Now, there were questions like, what makes us truly happy? And it might sound trite, but he said, finding our soul. And then there was another question, how to be human. And he said, always search. Now, that's what you do, and that's what I do, and a lot of people do. We search, don't we? And that is so important nowadays. But, however, he was sadly executed with hemlock poison, and because he wasn't popular with his so-called Greek democracy. But I have got a great regard for Socrates.
Me too, and his name liveth forevermore. So the people that poisoned him are long forgotten. The most important Socratic principle that I support, Norma, is that the richest among us should be no more than 3 times richer than the poorest among us. And imagine what a transformative thing that would be. If the poorest person in the country if the richest was not more than 3 times richer than the poorest person in the country, if the first person in the line could always see the last person in the line, and the last person in the line could always see the first person in the line, that kind of society would be a much happier society than the one we've got now, Norma. I'm sure you agree with me on that. Thank you, Norma, as always, for bringing the show to, I hope, a successful conclusion. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, same place, and bring another listener or viewer with you.